now call the Plan Commission of January 14th, 2020 to order. Roll call, please.
Sullivan here.
Brillo here.
Lorick here. Kavich here.
Guzikowski here.
Goldani here.
Seipert here.
Chandler here.
Everybody take a look at way back at the minutes of December 10th, 2019, the last time we convened. There are no questions, corrections, or errors. Motion.
Seipert moves to approve the minutes of December 10th, 2019.
Chandler seconds.
Roll call.
Sullivan abstains.
Brillo, aye.
Lorick, aye.
Kavich, aye.
Guzikowski, aye.
Goldani, aye.
Seipert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
Item 4 is our significant common council actions. Carrie?
Council approved the following: an ordinance to amend the conditions and restrictions in Ordinance 2950 for a physical and occupational therapy clinic and indoor recreation facility on the property at 140 East Rawson Avenue, and an ordinance to amend the conditions and restrictions in Ordinance Number 805 for the plan unit development for 9141, 9191, and 9315 South 13th Street. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Carrie. Item 5 under old business is our comprehensive plan, and it's consideration of a resolution to replace the adopted 2020 vision, a comprehensive plan for the city of Oak Creek, and adopt the comprehensive plan of the city of Oak Creek. This one, Doug or Carrie? Carrie?
I had asked the Plan Commission to provide some comments or questions in advance of this meeting, or for this meeting, to kind of continue our discussion of the comprehensive plan so that we can advance this to the next stage. If the discussion is such that we want to continue it onto the January 28th agenda, we can continue to do that as well. We have asked the representatives from Housey Levine Associates to be available for the January 28th meeting, if so necessary. A couple of comments were received from various entities regarding some minor changes to the comprehensive plan from when you received your paper copy. One of them was to identify a couple of parcels that had been misidentified as particular uses that we just didn't catch before. We also had a couple of changes that are going to be incorporated into the text of the amendment with regard to some of the recreation. We are going to be correcting a couple of the parks areas just so that they show up as properly on the future land use map. And I believe those are pretty much all of the changes that are going to be occurring since the draft you received. So if there are any questions or any points of discussion that you would like to bring up for tonight's meeting, please feel free to do so, and staff will provide more information as we can.
Hey, Fred, do you want to kick us off?
I'll kick it. So I have a question about District 4. And one of the proposals, we talked about the bluffs along the lakeshore that we want to label as agricultural. And why didn't we put it as parks and open spaces? On page 4, District 4,
Oh, in the staff report?
in the staff report. There's single family attached.
All right, give me one moment to get to that section. So Fred, could you please repeat your question about the
Okay.
bluffs?
Under the single family attached,
Yes.
District 4, we have a proposal. it says the city-owned property along the bluffs have been identified as agricultural instead of parks and open spaces. And I'm just wondering why we would label that agricultural and not parks and open spaces.
That may have been something that got corrected because in looking at the land use plan along the bluffs, it does show parks and open space for the city-owned property.
Well, I'm reading what we have in our report here.
Agreed, and I believe that has been changed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
In the parentheses, it says this more likely will be categorized as parks and open space though.
So that got corrected.
Anyone else? Just Chauncey?
I do have a question. In one of our prior meetings, we were identifying different types of single-family homes. One was attached, one was detached, and there was a third one. I can't recall the name of the third one.
In the land use plan, it calls for single-family detached, single-family attached, and then we go into multifamily. And in the land use plan itself, those are the residential categories. In the neighborhoods map, it does kind of call out a couple of different other housing typologies, if you will, but the land use categories are single-family detached, single-family attached, and multifamily.
There was another term that we used. There were 3 types of single-family homes. Once again, I can't think of what the third one is, and it was a new style.
Are you referring to accessory dwelling units, ADUs?
Yes. Thank you. And
That actually isn't a category itself. That's something that we would be looking at as a type of additional use on a single-family parcel.
So do we need to note that anywhere that those 3 options are acceptable, or we're just accepting those 2, single-family attached and detached?
Those are the 2 land use categories, but accessory dwelling units would be addressed by the zoning code.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Chris?
I just had a quick question on the map throughout. Do we have any targeted areas that we identify affordable senior housing or living?
We have categories where we could accommodate those areas. Most likely, those would be multifamily dwellings. If you look at the Housing and Neighborhoods Framework map in the comprehensive plan, it's on page 35, identifies some areas where there's targeted reinvestment residential. You might be able to accommodate some senior family or senior housing in that area. As far as other types of residential that could accommodate senior living, there's medium density and high density. It just depends on the type that would be proposed, and those areas have been highlighted in the Housing and Neighborhoods Framework map. So I think
That answers it then.
that answers your question? Okay.
Thank you.
Right.
The area Northwestern Mutual land between 27th and IKEA Way, that looks like it's going from a mix of residential and planned mixed use to mixed use. Does the use of mixed use with the flex overlay still allow if there were to be a single family development in that area?
I believe that the mixed use category is the most flexible that we have. And it does allow for a mix of typologies. So it would allow for different housing, including multifamily, including single family attached, single family detached, and the traditional types of mixed use that we see. So that could be vertical, it could be horizontal integration there. So it could be something that is like Drexel Town Square, where we incorporate apartments with commercial on the first floor, or we could incorporate standalone commercial buildings with standalone residential, but it all depends on the site plan for those particular properties. But it would allow for all of them.
Just a couple questions, probably just a little more detail for it. In District 2, and we're talking about the land around Forest Ridge, just a little west of IKEA, it's public, semi-public. Can you Give me an example of what's semi-public. I mean, public, I guess, would be a park, but what would semi-public allow for?
So the public, semi-public that's been identified is actually just the school. I think the colors are kind of running together a little bit, but the parks and open space would be Falk Park in that area.
Okay. And then, if you would, just for clarity, at least for me, I don't know if the rest of the commission needs it, but flex overlay. We've dealt with overlays before. Can you just kind of give us the overall 10,000-foot view of what the flex overlay does and
Sure.
allows?
What the flex overlay allows is for a specific development proposal that would be brought to the city that may not exactly fit in with the underlying land use category identified in the plan, but is similar in its application and makes sense within the context of the neighborhood and is appropriate for that particular property. So we're talking about if we have a mixed use as identified in the land use plan with an overlay district, and somebody wants to propose in a certain part of that just strictly commercial, that would allow us to do just strictly commercial rather than having to do a mixed use type. That's one example. We are going to actually be adding a little bit more clarifying language within the text so that everybody can have a better understanding of how to apply that flex overlay.
Okay, because we've dealt with overlay districts before.
This-
This seems to provide much more flexibility. I guess.
This is actually a land use category though, so the flex overlay is a little bit of a misnomer, if you will, because it's not overlay in the zoning context. So this allows just for land use planning purposes more flexibility.
Okay. Anything else? And then in District 1, the very first bullet point, going to remove the air transportation extending from College west to Howell. Takes in consideration that the runways won't be extended. Correct. So does that give us developable land, whether residential or business?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, the airport master plan, which is currently underway, will show that runway being demapped. And in anticipation of that, we are showing the bulk of those properties that were affected by that. I call it the phantom runway as business park development. So yes, it will allow for new development in those areas as well as an increased density of development and a more market-based height requirement for that. Whereas anything that would have been developed over there would have been subject to some pretty severe height restrictions given that future runway safety area.
Okay. That's about it from my end. Anybody else?
So staff is still recommending that that the Plan Commission holds action on this item until the January 28th meeting to allow for a couple of the identified changes to take place, more of a finalized document to be presented for your consideration, and also allows you to have that final direct dialogue with the representatives from Houseo Levine Associates, just in case there are any more clarifying or if there are any issues that would still remain that we would have to identify prior to your adoption.
Thank you, Carrie. So there's no further questions. We're looking for a motion to hold on 5A until, what was the date?
January 28th.
28th.
It moves to put the recommendations on hold till the next planning commission meeting, January 28th.
Chandler seconds.
Roll call.
Sullivan, aye. Clark, aye.
Gavich, aye.
Guzekowski, aye.
Ladani, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
Item 6A is review conditions and restrictions submitted by Creekside Crossing for the rezoned properties at 1920 West Drexel. And establish plan unit development for the properties at 1920, 1900, 1850, 1848, 1816, 1800, 1750 and 1700 West Trexel, and also 7700 South Ikea Way. Carrie, when you are ready, please.
The Plan Commission will recall that this was recommended for approval at the last meeting, and we have some conditions and restrictions. They were handed out to you in paper copy prior to this meeting with some updates. There have been a couple of further updates that I'd like to discuss with you. Nothing entirely different from what you had received before, but more clarifying language. Specifically, what we would like to discuss are the legal description on page 1 of 15 has been updated. There is a different land description that would be a little bit shorter than this, that gets to the description of all the properties involved from that certified survey map. So that will be updated. If you turn to the parking and access section on page 4, which is also under section 4, it clarifies that there is an existing traffic impact analysis that applies to this site. Also, under B, we have clarified that parking lots shall have a minimum 5-foot setback and include landscaping and screening approved by the Plan Commission with a modification allowance by the Plan Commission with a 3/4 majority. The change to the language will be if it's included as part of the master landscape plan. Similarly, in B3, perimeter landscape areas can be changed with that setback requirement by a 3/4 majority if included as part of the master landscape plan. Under 4C, it was clarified that there would be no direct vehicular access to IKEA Way or Drexel Avenue where it's prohibited. You'll recall that there was a CSM for this property that had specific areas called out, so this just clarifies that those areas will remain as no direct access to those two streets. There may be allowances for an additional access point outside of those prohibited areas. And then under 6 on page 5, building and parking setbacks rather, we wanted to identify just a couple of different things that may come up as part of the site planning for these individual parcels as they come out. One of them is a principal detached structure, which would have a 5-foot setback. And then the other would be a principal attached structure, which would have a 0-foot side setback. The reason that we call those out is because there may be an instance where we have a building that is connected, but the actual portion that is occupied by let's call it the tenant would also be owned, and the property underneath that portion of the building would be owned. An example would be the Kohl's building that's on Howell Avenue. Kohl's actually is in an attached building with the two other tenants that are there. I think it's Sherwin-Williams and Office Max. But Kohl's actually owns their real estate. They own their portion of the building and their portion of the land. So we're allowing for that kind of a transaction or that kind of an ownership situation. And then we also have a little bit of an asterisk to call out that the Plan Commission also has the ability to modify the parking setbacks per the previous section that we mentioned. Time of compliance is still 12 months as per the code, and all of the other sections have remained unchanged. With that said, if the Commission is satisfied with these proposed conditions and restrictions, there is a suggested motion that the Commission recommends that the Common Council adopts the conditions and restrictions as part of the planned unit development submitted by Walden OC LLC for the properties at 1920, 1900, 1850, 1848, 1816, 1800, 1750, and 1700 West Drexel Avenue, and 7700 South IKEA Way after a public hearing. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Carrie. Are there any questions concerning the conditions and restrictions?
I have just one question.
Go ahead, Fred.
Dealing with parking, we talked about compact cars or compact vehicles. What's the difference between that and a standard car?
So that allows for the parking stall to be shortened from 9 by 18 to 9 by 15.
I'm trying to think, we're kind of disappearing with the little cars yet. Anyways, no problem.
Anybody else? Greg?
The no direct vehicular access to IKEA Way and Drexel, does that exclude the roads that are being put in or that are just put in right now?
Yes, it does.
Okay,
So those 2 access points have already previously been approved.
okay. And the one off of Drexel, is that one way? Is that correct?
Yes.
It's entrance only?
Correct, right in.
And then in that same section A, says it's the traffic impact analysis shall be performed. That one was already done. Okay.
I have a
Chauncey?
question. With this proposed marketplace being so close to Drexel Town Square, are there any restrictions that must be identified for certain things to sell or not to sell, or maybe in competition one with another that we want to avoid?
We have not identified any of those as part of the conditions and restrictions.
Thank you.
Anyone else? General question. Are we at the point almost where we could start putting conditions and restrictions in for charging stations for cars? Some communities have gone to it.
We allowed that as part of the site plan review for IKEA. It's not part of a conditional use permit requirement.
Okay. So we wouldn't make it a requirement, but we definitely would allow it.
Yes,
Do we encourage it?
yes.
Good answer. And then just a couple other questions. As we actually get into the Creekside Crossing Marketplace PUD, can we talk about that
Sure.
a little bit? You have a couple highlighted areas.
Yes,
one-
those areas, I apologize for interrupting, Mr. Mayor. Those areas are actually highlighted to identify where there were some slight deviations in the conditions and restrictions from that in the submitted text. We have been working very closely with the applicants to incorporate those, so I believe that once we have the conditions and restrictions that have been proposed by and approved by the council, we'll ask that that document be updated so that they both match.
Okay, you pretty much took care of all my questions there because it's a lot of the things we dealt with, learning lessons from this project here at Drexel Town Square. So, okay. Other than that, I don't have anything. So, nothing more. Motion on 6A.
Oldani moves that the commission recommends that the common council adopts the conditions and restrictions as part of the planned unit development submitted by Walden OC LLC for the properties at 1920, 1900, 1850, 1848, 1860, 1800, 1750, and 1700 West Drexel Avenue and 7700 South IKEA Way after a public hearing.
Seifert seconds.
Roll call.
Sullivan, aye.
Clark, aye.
Gavich, aye.
Zagowski, aye.
Oldani, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
Item 6B is a consideration and review of a request for a temporary use permit submitted by Boylan Properties Oak Creek for a temporary storage of inventory of vehicles at the Ridge Community Church at 6912 South 27th Street. Carrie? Oh, Laurie, holy cow, I went right over zoning on
We tend to do this little dance, huh? So commissioners may recall a very similar request that we had in September 24th of 2019 that was denied. Not loud enough, I apologize. Commissioners may recall that there was a similar proposal on September 24th, 2019 regarding the temporary storage of 100 and some cars at their property at 7008 South 27th Street while their All-Star Honda dealership was under renovation. Just to give you a little history of what's happened since then, the staff recognized the challenges having to remove that number of cars and provided Boylan a 14-day temporary use permit to allow sufficient time to remove those cars. That permit expired on October 8th, 2019, but the cars still remained on site. Following that, though, we did hear some rumblings that they were working with the Ridge Community Church about potentially using their excess parking space in the back of their church as a storage area. On October 23rd, the Ridge Community Church approached the city to request a 14-day temporary use permit to store the vehicles on their property, which we did approve, with the condition that the Ridge Community Church and Boylan Properties submit a complete plan commission application prior to the expiration date of that temporary use. That temporary use permit expired on November 6, 2019. Unfortunately, we did not receive a plan commission application until November 21st, 2019, and that plan commission application was incomplete. Staff did reach out immediately and request to fulfill all the gaps in the proposal, but as of today, we still have not heard a response back. Boylan Properties, for what we see in the proposal, proposes that the storage of the vehicles be in the northeast parking lot adjacent to the existing church building, which is provided in the map right here, shown on your screen. This map does not provide any dimensions, impacts to the church operations, impact to the fire lanes, etc. This proposal, the proposal received also indicated that they'd like to put up a privacy fence to protect the storage area, but as of today, that fence still has not been erected. The proposal indicated that, or did not indicate any time frame that they were requesting. So staff is under the impression that they're still asking for the March 31st, 2019 that was in the original proposal. However, we're uncertain. No documentation has been also provided regarding an agreement between the Ridge and Boylan Properties for the storage of vehicles. So there's some unanswered questions with that as well. Should the Plan Commission approve the temporary use permit, staff suggests the expiration date reflect the original request or for no more than 6 months, and that no further temporary use permit be issued after the expiration date.
Okay. Is that clear as mud, everybody?
No,
2020, I apologize.
Yeah, there's.
March 31st, 2020.
Yeah, it's on our report as March
Thank you.
31st, 2019. I'll leave it up to you guys for questions first. So, Jossie, it looks like you're ready to go.
I do have a question for the applicant.
Anybody from Boylan here? Representative?
For the Ridge.
Or the Ridge? Come on up, please. Podium, we'll need your name and address, please, and who you're representing.
Mayor, Council, Jason Vanderpaul. I serve as the executive pastor at the Ridge Community Church. Here to answer any questions on behalf of the Ridge. Can't speak for Boylan Properties because I don't work for them. We're just kind of the vendor in this whole agreement. Unfortunately, everything you've said has come as an unfortunate surprise. That I thought all the paperwork had been submitted and everything was done. So glad we're here tonight. How can I help?
Okay, yeah, that was my first question in regards to the application. So it is not completed?
What you can find in the end of your packet is the only email that we
That
received.
was
It
it.
was just 4 lines of information.
Okay, and then my other question, can you provide a little details about the storage area of the cars? How many, where they will be, number of stalls, impact to your regular operation?
Yeah, when we bought the building, we had 450 or so parking spaces, knowing we would never use all of them. We only use the ones right in front of our building. It's about 220, 230 spaces there. The storage area that we're looking at is in the back of our building, so you'd have to look through the building if you're driving up 27th there, so you wouldn't see it from the street view. The agreement is for 150 cars, not to exceed 150 cars. There is no through access or fire lane access anywhere back there. It's just a dead parking lot. And so it made sense for us to let them use it.
And for how long?
6 months was the plan.
6 months.
I think their idea is to get through, and I'm speaking for them, I don't know if this is Val or not, I think the idea is to get through winter, get through their construction project, and then I don't know that they would need any additional storage from there.
Thank you.
Greg?
So I guess it seems like an ideal location. I wouldn't necessarily have a problem with the cars being there. And I'm sure that they're reimbursing you somehow, I would hope, to use that property. But it does sound like they've missed many different deadlines. They've not completed the paperwork that they needed to submit. They didn't show up to the meeting. So unfortunately, at this time, I wouldn't support this just because they haven't supplied the information that we were looking for, really.
Okay.
Add anything? Don? What you, Chris?
I would just go back to when they originally were coming to us for the request, and they were parking the cars on the property. We really did tell them that that's not a good example of how to be a good neighbor, because they have all the neighbors, that have to look at everything, and they really it didn't appear, and it does not appear now or then, that they're that worried about the neighbors and taking care of the stuff that needs to be taken care of. So
Connie?
I agree. Their follow-up isn't their strong suit, it seems like. So I'm not sure I could support this either. Where are they?
I expected him to be here. What if he's caught in maybe airport traffic tonight with what's happening? I don't know.
Fred, any comment?
No, I agree. They were parking cars on there before we even gave any consideration for approval. And then they were going to remove them right away, and they stood there for another, 3 weeks before they removed them. And I just think they got off on the wrong foot with the city.
Well, I'll add my, got somebody? Doug?
I guess that being said, and I acknowledge that, some of the follow-up hasn't been as robust as we would have preferred or hoped. But again, that being said, I think this is a far superior site to the dealership property, which was parked on grass, which was much closer to a residential neighborhood. This accomplishes their goals. It accomplishes the assistance for a Oak Creek business, that being the All-Star All-Star GMC, as they construct their permanent home at that location. It also is of some value, obviously, to the church, who makes use of some property which was really non-productive back there. So, I mean, I too certainly would have hoped for a much cleaner process, but I wouldn't want that to really taint the value that's present in this alternate accommodation for the temporary storage of those vehicles.
All right. I guess I'll go. First of all, I support the car dealership coming in. First of all, they just parked their cars there on the grass, which was completely against our zoning. They were asked multiple times to move them. They did nothing. They were bad partners from the get-go on that. I had multiple complaints coming out of the neighbors. I actually had talked to Pastor Forrest, and you guys were looking at doing some things with your building and suggested this option. I think it's a good option. And Boylan came back and said, well, we're over inventoried and we have this problem. Well, bad planning on your part doesn't constitute an emergency on our part, nor make us bend the rules. Sorry. And we're very business friendly here, but this is really just pushing the limits. So they did the right thing. They went to the church, they cut a deal, and then they do this. Leaves me in a bad spot for a guy that suggested it. First of all, I wouldn't allow him there without even putting up the fence. I wouldn't even consider it because they haven't followed through on their word at all. So I highly doubt that going forward. So I do agree with Doug. I think this is a win-win, but Boylan has to do their part. They're nobody that special here. Just like any other business, they have to follow the rules. That is plain and simple. No offense to the church. I mean, if they can get in here and get their paperwork done and the whole deal, they can start, but I would not put a car in that lot until they get their permits. I wouldn't support it going forward because that's it. They pretty much burned some bridges here, as far as I'm concerned. So that's that. Yeah, go ahead, Don.
So you said right now, on number 9 of the motion, the proposed motion, The vehicle shall expire on March 31st, and that was going under the assumption that nothing has changed. We don't know that for sure.
We don't know that for sure.
Okay, that's just another reason we need to hear from these folks.
And that is what the email was requesting as well on November 21st, to just get clarification of what they're requesting and a couple other outstanding items that we had questions on.
One other observation, at the speed that that dealership's going up, I doubt they'll make it by March 31st to have that lot ready for inventory of cars. It is a very slow-moving process up there. I don't know what's exactly going on, but it is a slow-moving process for a building like that.
We put this on hold.
You could hold it until the applicant appears and gets his paperwork, if that's what you
I
choose.
think that's a prudent thing to do.
I mean, either way, they gotta come back.
Hold it or deny it, but I would think hold it. Give them an opportunity one last time to save face.
And they really have to work with staff.
Yes.
So,
What's your recommendation as far as a hold versus a denial?
We want to put a time limit on that hold or just indefinite?
128. So the next plan commission.
Guzekowski will make a motion that the Plan Commission hold temporary use permit until the next Plan Commission meeting of 128.
Seifert seconds.
roll call.
Sullivan, aye.
Lorick, aye. Kavich, aye.
Guzekowski, aye.
Donnie, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
Item 6C, review site and landscape and related plans submitted by the Oak Creek Franklin School District for an addition to the existing Carrollton School, 8965 South Carrollton. Carrie.
The proposal is for an addition and some site and building modifications for Carrollton Elementary School, which is highlighted in red on the screen. The modifications to the existing school building include replacement of windows. The windows will include some blue spandrel accents, but basically they're going to be upgrading what is in place for that. This is the existing school property layout. And what we are going to be discussing is the addition on the south side of the existing building. They're also going to have a minor access modification for the addition. You'll see that off of the curved access drive there. That is to provide for that addition to become the main entrance to the school. There are also an additional 9 parking stalls that are proposed immediately east of that drive across from the existing building. That would bring the overall site total to 52 parking stalls. They're also including walkways on the west to connect to the existing hard surface playground and parking lot. That's on the west side of the property. And the addition and proposed parking all meet required setbacks from code. And if we turn now to the elevations for the building, there are, this will be a 2-story elevation in part. It's a 12,000 square foot approximate addition. It will include within the entirety a gym portion, restrooms, offices, and storage areas. The office portion that'll become the main entrance is actually a single story, with the gymnasium portion and the connection point being roughly 2-story. The second story on that gymnasium portion is actually mostly open. There is a mechanical area on the second floor. The proposed exterior building materials include brick to match the existing building, precast concrete in orange and in gray, glazed block accents in blue, 3 metal panel sections in blue and gray, and the new addition will have those same window elements as what's going to be upgraded on the existing building. So it'll have those blue accent pieces and some spandrel glass, as well as blue tinted vision glass. So per code, the brick veneer must be a minimum of 4 inches, and the use of thin brick is not allowed. This is more of a clarification point, since the plans that were provided didn't actually specify what the dimensions of the brick were. Metal panels and glazed block are not listed as approved primary building materials in the code. It also states that the facade of a manufacturing, commercial, office, institutional, or park building shall be finished with an aesthetically pleasing material. A minimum of 75% of the visible perimeter shall be finished with an acceptable glass, brick, or decorative masonry material. There were some elevations that included the calculations for the proposed building materials that were included in your packets. Any modification of the requirement for 75% or the use of alternate materials will require a 3/4 majority approval of the Plan Commission, but only if supplemental design elements or improvements are incorporated into the project which compensate for the modifications of the particular standard. It's up to the Plan Commission to determine whether or not that modification request has been fulfilled with this submission. We also did receive landscape plans. It shows the landscaping that would be around the perimeter of the building, if I can get there. A little bit hard to see, but it'll be on the entry facade as well as on most of the surrounding area until you get to the, let's call it the western portion. At that point, it's facing the existing playground, and it would be connected to that, that hard surface and parking area that we discussed earlier. So that was where the proposed walkway would be. There's also landscaping that's proposed around the additional 9 parking stalls. There would be a couple of additional points of clarification that we would need on the landscape plan. They're missing the planting height versus the mature height. They've already been aware of this, so that we'll just expect that whenever they submit for building permits to be included in those plans. Signs are not included as part of this review, but they're shown for placement purposes. Staff is working with the applicant to ensure that code requirements are met, and where they might not be, the appropriate review process would be pursued. There's a note in here about green infrastructure and requirements for construction within the public right-of-way. Those items need to be coordinated with the engineering department prior to permitting. And with that, if the Plan Commission is satisfied with the proposed plans, there is a suggested motion that the Plan Commission approves the site plan submitted by Andrew Cromie, Oak Creek Franklin Joint School District for the property at 8965 South Carrollton Drive, subject to conditions 1 through 4. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Carrie. Open it up for questions from the commission.
I have a question. Is the applicant available?
Depends on the question here, but Jason Christensen, Nielsen, Madsen and Barber, 1458 Horizon Boulevard, Racine, Wisconsin. Civil consultant for the applicant. We do have the applicant here, the school district, as well as the architect.
Just a question on what are the details or the reasoning behind the expansion?
For the expansion, well, the largest part, well, 2 parts of this, the gymnasium, obviously to upgrade that, but then the main secured
My
entrance.
apologies. So does the school have a gymnasium today? It does not. Oh, okay. So you're adding
The referendum. This is all part of the referendum.
So does that that entity exist in the school today, a gym, or you're just making it different?
Steve Rohde, Director of Buildings and Grounds for the school district, 7283 South 35th Street, Franklin. Right now it's a combination cafeteria gym. So like many of our other elementary schools, we're separating that function so that we can have a cafeteria and they can also still have gym class at the same time. Also, we're moving the office around a little bit in this process so we can make it a more secure office space. So,
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Got nothing? Donnie, you're still looking. I'll come on back.
I'm sorry, I was just trying to find where the main entrance is going to be on the, said the main entrance is going to be on the new part of the building. Is that right in the front off the drive-through?
Yeah, it's off the circle. It's on the north end of the building. The existing main entrance is a little, I guess it'd be south of that.
Right, yep. Okay, I know that, that was the school my girls went to. And I remember most people went in through the parking lot. And, so I was kind of hoping that they would make the main entrance where all the parking would be, but, that's kind of what I was looking for. I was reading about it. And, it's, I guess, not really more of a observation than a question. They got it up. Okay, thank you. I was more of an observation. Thank you.
Chris, anything?
No, nothing for me.
Greg?
Question, the main entrance, driveway, is that a one-way or is that two-way?
I think it's a one-way,
One-way?
but I'm going by memory. Can anybody, I see some people nodding back there. Thank you. You've got to be on the mic, but we're getting confirmation.
So are we worried that those parking spots are kind of in a dangerous area, if that's coming around that corner, for you to be able to walk into that front door?
That's a good point. You'd probably want to mark that. Most people don't really use that as a pickup that I'm aware of. I don't think they let children in and out through that main entrance. But I don't know, Don, your children went there.
Yeah, I think they're, if I
I'm
remember,
assuming.
they've changed pickups over the years, and a lot of times buses pick up there. But when parents need to come during school time, they would go through. The only way to do it would park. They don't have those. They're gone. They don't have those parking spaces there now. Those are additional. I'm right, and so you would have to just park alongside the curb, and then you would get off on the sidewalk. So there was never a crossing over like you're seeing now. That's going to be something new. So it's a legitimate question. That's kind of what I was getting at when I was talking earlier, that I was hoping like the main entrance would be where the main parking would be, which is in the back. And they always had to use a back door whenever there were events. And then if you were there school hours, you had to go through the front, park on the side. I see they're putting a couple stalls there, but yeah, if you could I would like to even see more stalls personally. And if you could do it in a way where you could go directly from parking straight into the door, as opposed to maybe walking a little bit on the road, like we're showing, it's something to consider, I would say. And there's no sidewalk going to be added? I mean, other than the one I'm talking about on the parking side. So you'd have to cross over to the sidewalk and then to the entrance. Is that correct?
Jason Christensen, Nielsen Madsen Barber. Yeah, so the 9 parking stalls are on the interior of that drive loop. There is no sidewalk in front of those parking stalls. They would just turn around and walk to the sidewalk that's on the school side of the entrance drive. So we are providing 2 handicap stalls there with a new curb ramp to get up to that sidewalk.
And the intended use for those 9 parking stalls is for daytime pickups or drop-offs?
Correct.
For the
It's
most part, so everything else is routed in the back when you're letting students out at some point?
correct. So this is primarily for during the day. The main office and the secured entrance is in the front of the building. And so that's where the visitors need to park during the day to access that main secured entrance, because there is no other access to that school during the day other than that new main entrance.
Just off the top of my head, I would encourage something going clearly marked on the road, a crossing, some kind of crossing marking on the road, encouraging people to use that, go directly to the sidewalk, because I could see a lot of people just kind of walking along the road until they get to where the front entrance is and then hopping on the sidewalk.
Sure.
So that would be, if you were to address it, that's one suggestion I have off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Encourage people to immediately get across onto the sidewalk.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
Did we address the issue with the stalls? I may have missed it, the parking stalls, the safety?
That's what we're talking about.
So everything is okay if we put the crossing paint on the ground? Is that what we're saying here? I just want to make sure I'm understanding.
Yeah, I think Don kind of covered it with just clearly marking a pedestrian walk to the doorway.
Correct, and those parking stalls primarily used during the school day. There's not a lot of traffic on that entrance drive during the day.
Let's just kind of talk about the metal panels. And the veneer. They're not quite where we need them, is that correct? Is it gonna be is it gonna be a precast tip up? So it'll hit the masonry.
I think, if I remember correctly from the submission, there's really only one area where the proposed building materials don't meet the 25% maximum. But the use of those materials are not called out as primary building materials as allowed anyway. So it's one of those situations where we, again, have materials that don't meet what are in the code. So we need to have the 3/4 majority for just the approval of an alternate material. And then the visible perimeter, which is the 25%.
Okay.
And as long as the brick meets that minimum standard for the dimensions, staff doesn't have an issue with the proposed materials.
I take it the gymnasium's precast tip up. Correct. Front main entrance, or is that precast as well?
Hi, Devin Cack, 209 South Water Street. I'm architect with Plunkett Rasich Architects, working with Oak Creek Franklin. Yes, the front of the building, the main entrance will be a full bed face brick, so nominal 4 inches deep, actual 3 5/8. And then the glazed block, it is just a decorative CMU. And the gym, to satisfy that question, it will be precast. Created off-site and brought on-site.
So, is our brick code 4 inch? And you're going with 3 in?
Nominal 4 inches, it's a
Oh.
standard masonry
Terry's
unit.
giving me the thumbs up. It's kind of a thing around here. Okay, we're good then.
Thanks.
Okay. Don't have anything else. Nothing else? Motion.
Clark moves that the Plan Commission approve the site plans submitted by Andrew Cromie, Oak Creek Franklin's Joint School District for the property at 8965 South Carrollton Drive with the following conditions. Number 1, that all relevant code requirements remain in effect. Number 2, that all green infrastructure and stormwater management requirements are submitted for review and approval to the engineering department prior to the submission of permit applications. Number 3, that the landscape plan is updated to incorporate the height of plants at installation and maturity. And number 4, that all detailed revised plans are submitted in digital format to the Department of Community Development prior to the submission of permit applications.
Seifert seconds.
Roll call.
Sullivan, aye.
Bill, aye.
Lorick, aye.
Gavich, aye.
Guzekowski, aye.
Ladani, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
All right. Good luck with that. Item 60 is consideration of another conditional use permit. Actually, this is an amendment to it for to allow for the storage of vehicles for sale on the property located at 561 West College Avenue. This is for Carvana. Lori.
I got it.
Darn it. Come on.
Gotta give him a little.
Should we hold up a flag?
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
So, Plan Commissioners may be familiar with this site. It is the current site of the Enterprise Rental Facility on College Avenue, and they do have a tenant, which is Carvana. Carvana is a kind of a new to market vehicle sales operation. So before we get into the specifics of their conditional use permit amendment request, the conditional use permit for the property itself was approved in November of 2012. That allows for the rental operation there, but it was restricted to rental vehicles. So they have auto service for the vehicles themselves and outdoor storage. The key in that conditional use permit is the term rental vehicles. It was very specific to allow for, at that time, DTG or Dollar Thrifty, which has now become Enterprise. Also in Section 8D of that conditional use permit, it did specify the outdoor storage area shall be used only for fleet vehicles normally associated with a commercial care rental operation. So while this would be kind of a synergistic business, it unfortunately was not allowed as part of the very strict interpretation of the conditional use permit. So we're here for an amendment. So the use of the property for the sale of vehicles wouldn't be allowed without this amendment. And the request is to allow for the Carvana operation storage of inventory vehicles for sale. So if you haven't been made aware of Carvana, they are unlike a traditional vehicle dealership because every transaction is online. There are no sales or receipt of trade-in vehicles at the property like you would with a traditional vehicle dealership. So customers go online, take a look at the inventory, they're given a 360 view of the vehicle that they want to purchase, they make their transaction online. Carvana will then arrange for that vehicle to be delivered to an arranged spot or their home, and that's where the transaction occurs. Same for a trade-in vehicle. It's all transaction online, and then a tow truck or a vehicle delivery will go to that site and drop off and pick up. At this site, they are going to be storing up to, I believe they said, 85 vehicles. That's what their maximum capacity would be. Right now, they're averaging about 30 vehicles stored in the rear portion, which is currently fenced and striped for parking. Trade-ins would be at the same time as deliveries. They would occur within that parking area, so everything would be delivered behind the fence, and that would occur between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. That's the same for when they would make deliveries to the customer would be about within that same time frame, or by appointment. They're anticipating 48 employees at any given time at that property. They have 18 plus parking stalls specifically for employees. None of the vehicles that would be accepted or delivered would be in the front parking lot along College Avenue. It would all be in the back, so within that fenced area. They average about 1 to 4 days for storage of vehicles that they sell online prior to delivery. So these are very quickly moving vehicles. There would be no customers that would be visiting the site to view the vehicles. That's what's different about this particular use. They also have some minor preparation of the vehicles. They'll do an inspection, a minor service and cleaning, but that's pretty much what's limited on site. The existing CUP allows for the storage of vehicles within that fenced area, as previously mentioned. It also prohibits the storage of semi-trucks and trailers, recreational vehicles, construction vehicles, and equipment. That condition would remain for the entirety of the property and all users. Automobile service is also allowed within the existing conditional use permit. Engine repair, body repair, and painting are not included, and they are not recommended in the conditions and restrictions that are before you. We are also proposing a clarification that there would be no sales directly at the facility, and this is intended to distinguish this particular type of user in this unique situation from a traditional vehicle dealership operation. There are no site or exterior building modifications proposed with the exception of a potential future sign, and that would be the extent of the operation. With that, if there are any questions on the proposed conditional use permit amendment conditions and restrictions, basically it includes the Carvana site plan as part of the attachments. If you turn to page 2 of the conditions and restrictions, the site and use restrictions, maintenance and operation requirements, that's all been modified to allow for this additional operation. And the other section that has been changed, under parking and access, it actually references the plans that were approved on December 12th, 2017. That was for Enterprise to have an on-site outdoor storage of, I believe it was gasoline. And setbacks, parking is updated to reflect the 30-foot setback. That has been updated since the original CUP was approved. And then the time of compliance, allowing for Carvana to begin operations within 12 months of the date of adoption of the approval ordinance, if recommended. There is a suggested motion that the Plan Commission recommends that the Common Council approves a conditional use permit amendment to allow outdoor storage of vehicles for sale on the property at 561 West College Avenue after a public hearing. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Carrie. Questions? Fred, you
Yeah,
want to
I have
start
a
us?
question. Is the applicant here?
Good evening. My name is Christian Orr. Address is 1930 West Rio Salado Parkway, Tempe, Arizona 85281.
Question I have is, what do you do with the trade-ins that you take? Do you park them in your back lot with the other cars, or how long, if you do put them there, how long would they be?
Very similar and often shorter time frame than the cars that are being delivered to customers. They're brought back to the site, and then when the 9-car hauler comes, it's brought back to our main location in Indianapolis, where those are either auctioned off or repaired for resale.
You basically wouldn't keep those trade-ins there, you'd
Correct.
dispose of
Yep.
them to an auction house.
So typically what you're going to see on that site, if you see anything at all, you kind of have to look through the gate, are beautiful, fresh cars just to be delivered to customers. It's a very lean operation.
Thank you.
Bossy, anything?
My question was answered.
Okay. Don, anything?
None
Chris?
for me.
Greg?
So the rental car operation is still there, correct? This is just going to have more cars to the lot?
The original approval for this site actually had one large parking lot that envisioned 2 tenants. So this is allowing for Enterprise to use the eastern side of the lot as they currently do, and the tenant to use the western side of the lot. It's already divided by fence.
So somebody buys a car online and it gets delivered to their house, for example, do you take returns?
We
What if
do.
they don't like it once they
Yes, so there's a 7-day or 400-mile return, and it's the same process. If you're unhappy with it for any reason or no reason at all, if you have stayed in that window, you can set an appointment and they'll bring the truck back and return it, no questions asked. We're kind of the Amazon of the car world.
They bring your old car back? Changing. Dawn? Okay. I guess just some questions on delivery. What are the current hours for Enterprise that they operate under? I know over the years we've had, hang on, you can't speak, sir. You want to speak, you can come up to the podium, but you can't speak from back row. Carrie?
I don't know what their current hours of operation are, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't believe that the original conditional use permit limited their hours per se.
I thought delivery hours were,
There may have been some areas where they had some.
I thought deliveries, because we didn't want,
It's
the
possible,
haulers
but
going
it would
there.
also be part of the noise ordinance that they would have to follow. So if it's not specific within the original conditional use permit what the hours of operation would be, they would still have to abide by code requirements for the noise ordinance.
I know early on we did register complaints.
I don't see, we would have included it in here if they had separate hours of operation. We would have parsed out the 2 operations for that. I don't believe that the original conditional use permit conditions and restrictions had hours of operation.
If I may,
Yeah, go ahead.
that was a topic of discussion that we had. The original reason that we became aware of the specifics of the original conditional use permit was that we were seeking an additional suite number to deliver mail. And so it was brought to our attention that there had been previous complaints with noise. And so we, when working with staff, made sure that we were working within those sound and operating hours and intend to do so.
Are the fences screened going to the east where the residents live? Car headlights, stuff like that. I thought when we did Enterprise, we really kind of went over that a lot. I'll bring you guys up in a sec. If you guys can add to it, come on up. One at a time, name and address.
Name's Keen Keogh. I live at 513 West College. I own 521 and 531. I'm their neighbors. It's been an ongoing business caravan for the last 6 to 8 months. They've been transporting cars there along with Enterprise. We have a lot of issues continuing since last time I was here with late night transit semi-trucks dropping off vehicles. All hours 24/7. And now it's compounded with these guys too on top of it. I even got a list of times. Last time I was here, you guys told me to notify the police department. I've called the police department numerous times. They come down. There's no conditions on the truck driver's paperwork limiting when they can deliver cars. There's actually an Oak Creek statute, 11-26B8, that limits them. So they never get tickets and it never stops. They just continue to do this. It's been an ongoing nightmare for years now. And it's gotten worse with these guys. So I don't know what the solution is because I've called, I talked to everybody and nothing's getting accomplished.
It's been a while, but I know we've had complaints in the past. I thought we had hours of delivery.
There is in that statute that they're not allowed to
But we would
deliver.
have put it in the conditions and restrictions with Enterprise. And if Carrie says they're not there, I believe her.
This, I don't recall that they were. They would have been incorporated into what's before you had they been spelled out, but we do have deliveries of vehicles for sale for the Carvana operation shall occur between the hours of 7 a.m. and 8 p.m.
It's 24/7 right now.
Can we make that for the site and put that same thing for the entire site, whether it's Carvana or Enterprise?
To compound the problem, they actually stopped a semi-truck on College Avenue to unload cars. And then they also do the same thing in front. I mean, 4 o'clock in the morning, chains slamming against loading ramps. It wakes me up. It wakes my neighbor up. A lot of times by the time the police department gets there, they're gone. Then when they do get there, nothing gets accomplished. So it's like I'm beating a dead horse. Nothing's getting done.
We got to look into this for you a little further, see if we can figure something out. So
I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Come on up, sir.
While I definitely want to make sure that all needs are taken care of and we're all good neighbors, I would just like to point out the term "they" is very vague. And while the parcel is owned by one owner, there are 2 tenants, and I would ask and request that council consider that the application is one of those 2 tenants, and that those actions are not necessarily those of both of them.
I would concur with you, and I'm the one that said it, and I do concur with you as I think about it. We got to take each one separately, but again, we do have an ongoing issue here. If we got a chance to correct it, I think we should really look at it hard to correct it. And unfortunately, it probably starts with you and then goes to the next one.
Well, I can tell you that staff in the past have had multiple conversations about the issue with Enterprise. And unfortunately, we're in a situation of he said, she said almost, where Enterprise is saying, no, we're not. We're operating within the terms of the code. And then we have a neighbor complaint. And as the neighbor mentioned, by the time the police arrive, sometimes those complaints have already gone away. I would ask that the Plan Commission allow staff another opportunity to contact Enterprise to discuss the issue. Perhaps we can have a solution for the Common Council hearing if this is recommended for approval.
Hold this?
Or
no?
No,
This is for a specific amendment for
Okay.
Carvana.
Yes.
I would ask that we
I
have,
agree
that
with the
staff has some
applicant.
time
We
to
have
talk to
We have
Enterprise.
to deal with him, but ongoing, we definitely have, because we have heard it in the past. And again, he should. I don't think they're going to go that far, but if they're parking on the road and unloading, trying to dodge a loophole, I would actually like to see a condition saying they can't unload anytime after 8 o'clock within 1,000 feet of the property or something.
And I do recall,
You know,
Mr. Mayor, I do recall this, when it came up the last time, and it was a pretty big deal. And these guys have been, bearing the brunt of this noise. So we need to hopefully dial in on this, and maybe the hours of operation that we could maybe zero in would help with deliveries.
Well, again, as part of this conditional use
Yes.
permit amendment request, we do have in here that deliveries of vehicles for sale for the Carvana operation shall occur between the hours of 7 a.m. and 8 p.m.
Perfect.
Yes.
Right now, the state.
you got to be on the
Yeah,
mic,
microphone.
Name
Right.
again.
Keen Kehoe. Right now, the city ordinance is 8 to 5 for car transport. Because they're doing it 24/7. Doesn't matter if it's Christmas Day, holidays.
You're going to have to be on the mic, sir.
If you would, there's two segments, two separate timeframes that are referred to within the sound ordinance, and we previously spoke with staff about it. There is the one, but there's also a second, and in terms of the conditional use, that is something that has previously been approved by the council, or commission rather. That has previously been discussed.
I get it. So,
And-
Lori, they probably went off the noise ordinance versus the car delivery. I'm getting kind of deep in the weeds here, but
We did, and the fact of the matter is that there is a concern on the table, and Carvana, just like Enterprise or any other business, we have every intention of honoring and following those. We've set our stipulations straightforward, and if there are concerns or problems with Enterprise, then it would be my hope that that would be executed through due process, just like it would if it was Carvana's. So the topic at hand is Carvana's conditional use permit amendment, and if you want to address Enterprises, I, in my opinion, that would be a separate matter.
Mr. Mayor, so just wanted to read off section 17.0810, the noise ordinance that we, as staff, have been operating under. And when Mr. Kehoe contacted us several months ago and we discussed with him, it states, at no point on the boundary of a residence or business district shall the sound intensity level of any individual operation exceed 58 to 62 decibels respectively during normal operations. So that's where the struggle lies, is what is defined as normal operations.
yeah, it's kind of hard on a delivery type service as they're coming cross country with this stuff. I can understand that point of view, but we got to be reasonable. Obviously, 4 a.m. is not normal operating hours to drop cars off and do what they do with it. I think we have to better define what their operation is at Enterprise for sure. And
Correct, and we
and
have
again,
talked to
I
Enterprise
really
trying
want
to
to stick to the
define that.
Carvana thing at this point in time, because that's what we're dealing with on the agenda. But the Enterprise thing is slowly seeping into this, and I do agree with the applicant. We have to keep it separate. So,
I have a brief statement. My name is Rodney Carter. I'm with Hush Blackwell in Milwaukee, 555 East Wells Street, representing Carvana. We've worked with staff, we've talked to staff, we understand the concerns there with hours of operation and noise. And staff indicated that that would be the significant issue they predicted with what's before you tonight. We are accepting of the hours that are being recommended. And Mr. Orr was out there and met with staff today and emphasized those hours of operation and the need to be cognizant of what's being proposed, and is going to reinforce, if the city approves this use, the rules of the game. So from our perspective, from Carvana's perspective, we will adhere to those hours of operation.
Go ahead.
Keen Keo again. They've been running this for at least 6 months and not following the rules now.
So,
They've been dropping cars off all the time. There's no regulations on it.
Yeah, and Mr. Kehoe, we don't have any knowledge unless it's been reported and documented with either our zoning administrator or
Can I have someone's card that I can start
police.
communicating? Because the police are actually getting kind of tired of me, which I don't blame them, because nothing's ever getting done.
I get it.
You know, they got more important things to do and then come by me.
I get it, but if it's part of the public good, it's part of their jobs. They're going to have to come out. You just
So who can I call when I do have problems? Because I got pictures of semi trucks getting 4 or 5 in the morning.
zoning administrator.
Someone's card.
Lori.
Someone want to give me their card.
Sure, and we've spoken in the past too. We need to figure out also how to identify if this is a enterprise delivery or a Carvana delivery, which
Well,
is the other issue.
I see where they unload the cars and where they drive the cars. I know which side is which.
Well, again, we need plate numbers, something that's trackable. When we get in, no offense, I'm sure you're an honest person, but when we get into person's word, it gets fuzzy. You understand that.
You just need to be able
Yeah,
to
it's just
document
this has been going on for so many years.
Yeah.
It's
And we should take care of it. We should. So again, the proper channels, I mean, you're doing it. It's the police and the zoning that take care of that.
Right, and I also want to note too that staff's hours are pretty limited from 7:30 to approximately 4 o'clock. And so the PD is really an excellent resource for you because they can actually come out in that moment in the middle of the night, whereas I unfortunately cannot do that to help you. So they can help work together as a team with all of us to go and verify that information.
I understand, but people have to start getting citations, I think, for things to start changing. And somehow the truck driver's paperwork has to get that there's restrictions on their paperwork. So when the police do look at their paperwork, because they're looking at the guy's just doing his job delivering
Right, he
cars.
just wants to drop
They don't
his
want to give him a
cars.
ticket for doing his job. So where's the responsibility fall on?
You're right. I mean, it's the business. And again, I don't know exactly where the cars are coming from or how they target the times, because wherever, if a guy's picking them up in Detroit and scooting around the lake, he gets them at the end of the day there. He's maybe in the middle of the night. I don't know.
And with all that sign being out front, there's front signs been down for how many months? So half the time they're parking in front of my place, calling my phone number saying I'm getting cars delivered because they don't know where they're going. So
Oh, okay. Back on Carvana. But again, just continue the process. Sir, back there, I know you had something you wanted to say. If you want to come up, now's your... He's got it. Okay. Just don't want to deny you your shot. So. Okay. Anything else? Chauncey?
I do have an additional question for the applicant in regards to, we covered sales. Did you also say you had rental options here too?
We don't.
Do or do not?
We do not.
Do not. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else, Matt? Anything?
Nope.
Chris?
nothing.
All right. Fred or Don? No. All right. We got to go. We got to make a decision here. So again, keep the enterprise thing separate from the applicant as to what's on the agenda. Staff feels that the hours of 7 to 8 is acceptable. I guess the only thing, and I don't know wordsmith it if we can even do it, but disallow any unloading of vehicles on College Avenue. If we could add that as a condition and restriction, that vehicles cannot be unloaded on College Avenue.
There is a code section that we can cite.
I'd appreciate that. At least then bring it, we can get in contact with the other tenant, which is Enterprise, and see if we can get a workable solution to the issues we have. And can we, here's a question that I don't know. Can we amend those conditions and restrictions if we have repeat violations? How does that work, Doug?
If there were a violation of the conditions and restrictions, there is a revocation clause in the process to revoke the conditional use permit. What it sounds like is that there's been identification that it's been a violation of our city ordinance, so that necessarily wouldn't trigger a revocation of the conditional use. I mean, at some point it might rise to that level, but I mean, it typically you don't amend conditional use permits unless it's the applicant is in concurrence with that. I think we'd have to take a look at that and as part of what the original conditional use permit said. And if there's a violation of that and there's continued violations of that, there is a process available to revoke that conditional use permit. But and that's why in some of our future, in our more recent conditional use permits, you'll see some method for limiting the duration of that, just so that these don't go on indeterminately. But in this case, it doesn't look like that was of that vintage that it had those requirements in it.
Guess we should.
Yeah, we can work with maybe offline with the staff on trying to fix the Enterprise.
Yeah, for sure. And hopefully it doesn't go that far, that we can work a workable solution with them admirably.
And I would say that, I mean, the conditional use permit is with the property owner too, and if their tenant, if they have got knowledge that their tenant is not living up to the city's expectations, I would hope that they would want that rectified as much as the neighbors do and as much as the city does.
Speaking of this, do we have a time limit on this condition and restriction? I don't think so, do we?
We did not include one.
Like I said, do we want to put what have we been doing, 5-year?
We can do that. Typically, if we have knowledge about the term of the lease, we would run that concurrently with that, unless that presented a problem for the Plan Commission and Common Council.
No, I mean, it gives us something. It gives us some teeth if violations do occur and we run into a situation like that.
Does the applicant have a lease term?
We do, and I'm unfortunately not aware of that term. I apologize.
We can find that out as part of our research for the public hearing.
I think I would include it. I would include that in the delivery on College. I know it's difficult and it's a little rougher, but as we're going forward, we're trying to tighten up the things that fall through the cracks on us that either A, zoning can't catch, or protective services ain't delivering for us. So. All right, clear. All right, let's take a stab at a motion on 6D.
Guzekowski makes a motion that the Plan Commission recommends to the Common Council to approve the conditional use permit to allow the outdoor storage of vehicles for sale on the property at 5621 West College Avenue after a public hearing.
Seifert seconds.
Roll call.
Sullivan, aye. Lorick, aye.
Gavich, aye.
Guzekowski, aye.
Ladani, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
And we will, congratulations, you'll go through the process of the public hearing coming up. Whatever date that is. Either way, very soon. Again, if you are conducting operations there, you're in violation. We will address Enterprise going forward, Mr. Keel. You got something to say?
Notices, I'm still not getting these notices. of these-
Should have, you're within 300 feet. Now, tonight, would they have gotten one tonight?
I don't know, it's because I have a business address there that they just, but
Well, any affected property usually is within 300 feet, correct?
We use the county's database as far as where the tax bill is sent, so we can certainly investigate that, but we don't pick and choose who we send them to.
Usually it's the affected properties within 300 feet.
when's the next meeting?
It would probably be 2 weeks. Oh, man.
No, a public hearing has to be warned, so it wouldn't be for another 4 weeks.
You're looking at Valentine's.
If I could get on a mailing
That
list, that'd
council
be
meeting.
great.
Gotcha. All right. Moving on. 6E, consideration of a conditional use permit for the Panera Restaurant with a drive-through facility at the property located at 7902 South Main Street. Gary?
The proposal is for a 4,763 gross square foot restaurant with a drive-through facility. On the property shown in red on the screen. The review of the conditional use permit request is governed by the General Development Plan and Regulating Plan for the Drexel Town Square Mixed Use Plan Development District and Chapter 17 of the Municipal Code, and the parcel is located within the mixed-use sub-district within Drexel Town Square. Drive-through and drive-up facilities are considered conditional uses in the DTS MUPDD and may be allowed in the B5, B1, B2, C1, and C2 buildings in the mixed-use sub-district only if they are consistent with the site plan for the first-generation development proposal and are consistent with the goals of active and walkable streets described in the DTS MUPDD. What is on the screen before you is a proposed layout for the site that was submitted in support of the requested conditional use permit. The drive-through is located on the east side of the building as shown on the screen. The proposed hours of operation are Monday through Thursday, 6 a.m. to 9:30 p.m., Friday through Saturday, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., and Sunday, 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Peak customer hours are listed as 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. However, we do not have information on peak customer shifts for the dine-in and drive-through portions. It is anticipated that 55 to 60 employees, with 12 to 15 employees per shift, will be at the site. However, we do not have any information on the effect of delivery or catering services that may occur on the property, on total employee count, or the anticipated peak delivery for daily delivery and weekly and monthly catering volumes. It may have an effect on the traffic vehicle to and from the site, the vehicle traffic to the site, and parking location reservations for delivery and or catering vehicles. Direct access is prohibited from both Drexel Avenue and Main Street, so there are two proposed access points off of the existing private drive, which goes in between this site and the existing Forge and Flare building. As shown, there are a total of 56 parking stalls called for on the site, with a shared drive aisle with the parcel to the east. The parcel to the east currently has parking and is the site of the PetSmart and Mattress Firm combined building. There have been 3 parking stalls signed for rapid pickup, 1 stall identified as a drive-through pull-ahead stall. However, as part of the DTS MUPDD, there is a requirement for an analysis of parking supply and demand that is required as each project is developed. We have been provided employees in general peak times, and a note that Panera will have both vehicle and bicycle parking on the site to satisfy the needs of its customers' employees, and a recognition that shared parking is available in the existing connected lot. However, we do not have an actual analysis. We do not have information regarding customer counts at similar locations or anticipated customer counts to this site So it's difficult for staff to provide any kind of recommendation on whether the proposed parking as presented meets the requirements. This is a significant building site at the entrance to Drexel Town Square, as was mentioned in the report. It is one of the last 3 parcels within Drexel Town Square to develop. It is especially important that the design of this site and its building or buildings is in conformance with the first generation development proposal and addresses the key elements of the DTS MUPDD. Some of those key elements include buildings along the entirety of Main Street to meet the build-to zone requirements. That orientation is toward the public street, particularly with Main Street. And this is part of an original approval for this site, which showed that a building did meet these requirements. And it did have the intent, as mentioned in the DTS MUPDD General Development Plan and Regulating Plan, the intent of creating a full block and sense of enclosure for pedestrians that is continued south to the square. That previously approved site also included a unified parking lot with the property to the east that showed a single circulation pattern. It provided clear visual cues for vehicles and pedestrians for circulation expectations. It did not provide for a drive-through or drive-up facility, and there was one driveway or access on the south, which is currently existing. While the build-to zone requirements specifically are addressed at the site plan review level, the General Development Plan and Regulating Plan states that at least 60 to 90% of the linear edge shall be building facade, and this is really important because the build-to zone is what provides the orientation of the building to the public portion. It provides the interaction for pedestrians and for users of the building. The build-to zone requirement for principal buildings on corner lots, which this is it has to be met within 0 to 5 feet of the property line. And along Main Street, this would require a minimum of 128 linear feet of the building facade to be within this area. So 0 to 5 feet from the property line, that's where the building would have to be for 128 linear feet. As proposed, the building actually is in its entirety 98 feet 4 inches on the west. However, portions are more than 5 feet from the property line. So that would have to be amended to meet the requirements of the build-to zone. As for goals for active and walkable streets within the General Development Plan and Regulating Plan, the preliminary plans do incorporate quite a few things, including outdoor patio dining, a pergola, bike rack, and planter elements, and connection points to the public sidewalks. However, as mentioned in the report, staff does have quite a few concerns for site design and the potential for pedestrian vehicle conflict. There are 2 public entrances for this building. One is the main entry vestibule on the northwest corner, and the other is in the patio dining area on the southwest. While that's convenient and strategically placed for pedestrians and patio patrons, a majority of the customers arriving by vehicle will have no option but to walk through opposing lanes of vehicle traffic for those arriving to and departing from the site, or searching for a parking stall within the parking lot. Pedestrians are directed through internal walkways and stripe markings to cross the drive-through lane to get to the building, neither of which actually leads to a door to the building. As mentioned, as shown on the site plan and on the screen in front of you, the pedestrian crossing has the potential to be blocked by vehicles who are in the drive-through lane, which would force a pedestrian to go around or between the vehicles to get to the building, causing a major safety concern. Per the General Development Plan and Regulating Plan, drive-up lanes shall be designed to minimize their impact on pedestrian circulation systems. Drive-up lanes, including the required queuing space, may not impede pedestrian access to public building entrances. Pedestrians arriving from the southeast are also forced to cross a 44-plus foot wide driveway apron, and this is important when we're talking about site circulation and pedestrian safety. The GDPRP states that in all cases, driveways and drive lands should be designed to operate without endangering the public safety, and when vehicular parking entries, curb cuts, and driveways cross the public walks and easements, they shall not exceed 24 feet in width, except when deemed necessary to accommodate service and emergency vehicles. This driveway apron is nearly twice the maximum width stated and is not necessary to accommodate emergency vehicles. There is also a vehicle conflict at this portion. They're showing vehicles entering from that private driveway turning right would be turning into vehicles going south to exit. As was mentioned in the 2016 staff report for review of the building that was approved on this particular lot, design choices made on this site and for the building will have impacts beyond this parcel. The significant investments that have been and continue to be made within Drexel Town Square rely upon the remaining developments to uphold the same design standards, address the same key elements, and meet the same goals of the DTS MUPDD. For those reasons, planning staff have concluded that the conditional use permit request for a restaurant with drive-through facility is not consistent with the first generation development proposal within the approved general development plan and regulating plan for the DTS MUPDD, which is cited in section 170334 of the municipal code. It also does not fully meet the goals of the approved general development plan and regulating plan for the DTS MUPDD in section 170334 of the municipal code, particularly for active and walkable streets due to pedestrian safety and vehicle conflict concerns, and would also require substantial redesign to meet the goals and requirements of both the approved Drexel Town Square general development plan and regulating a plan for the DTS MUPD in section 170334 of the municipal code and chapter 17 in general. There is a suggested motion, therefore, that the Plan Commission recommends that the Common Council does not approve a conditional use permit for a restaurant with a drive-through facility on the property at 7902 South Main Street due to the three stated reasons. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Carrie. Doug, any comments to add?
Only to preface some of the discussion that's going to take place by letting the Plan Commission know about some rather recent changes to the state statutes with respect to how municipalities regulate and review conditional use permits. Whereas conditional use permits in the past, there was much more discretion involved on the part of the municipality. The state, through recent amendments to their statutes, has really tightened that to the extent that the burden of proof has somewhat shifted from the applicant as to why the conditional use permit should be granted, and I'm paraphrasing, to the municipality or the zoning board or authority as to why it shouldn't be granted. And in their deliberations, in your deliberations, in the council's deliberations, with respect to this, I mean, you must rely on, I just want to get the terminology correct here, on facts and information as opposed to speculation, and that the conditions that were to be, should they be approved, were to be imposed upon the conditional use permit, have to meet certain conditions, and that they need to be reasonable, they need to be measurable, and they need to be based on substantial evidence provided at the hearing. And such things can include, for instance, we talked about duration and the ability to transfer and renew that. But in some cases, and you may encounter this at the subsequent public hearing, I mean, things that we were discussing should be limited to things that are those reasonable and measurable impacts directly on this. And certainly, while everyone has their opinions as to, well, should there be a drive-through here or shouldn't there be a drive-through here, or what's that going to do to the rest of the development or other parts of the city, those are not really things that you should be discussing and deliberating as part of your review of this conditional use permit. I would ask that you kind of keep those, again, to those items which are pertinent towards the conditional use permit that's being requested at this location.
Thank you, Doug. Guess we'll start with Chelsea. She looks like she's ready to go.
I'm ready. I have a question for the applicant.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the Plan Commission. I'm Attorney Brian Randall of Davis and Keelthau, 111 East Kilbourne, Suite 1400 in Milwaukee. Here on behalf of Panera, have a number of people who are on our project team here, and we also do have a short presentation that we can give, but absolutely willing to answer the question if you'd like right out of the gates.
Well, let's do the presentation first. Is that
All right,
acceptable?
let's do the presentation.
Because
Brian.
that may answer.
I was advised that there'd be a blue cord up here. Is it the one with the blue ring that I could plug into? If you're ready, Mr. Mayor, and everyone,
Go right
great.
ahead, Brian.
Well, thank you. And again, as I introduced myself already, pleased to be here on behalf of the Panera Project team. I've represented Panera before. The Village of Pewaukee had a new Panera a number of years ago. And of course, I've always been excited to be here in Oak Creek with a number of projects and clients that brought me before this body and the Common Council. I did pay my rent check. I think I have a number of upcoming agendas that will make 2020 a busy year. So good to see you all this evening. We have, as I mentioned, a short presentation. One other thing though, and I did bring a printed copy of the Drexel Town Square General Development Plan and Regulating Plan. Many of you are very familiar with it, but if anyone does need a paper copy, I make reference to a couple page numbers, and of course, staff is very well familiar with it as well. But this is an extra copy that I'd be happy to pass it down if anybody needs to make reference. As mentioned, we have a number of people here. Almost everyone will speak, but some can just answer questions if they come up. So we're going to have Blair Williams speak on behalf of the current property ownership, because as staff mentioned in the both staff report and Carrie touched upon it tonight, there was a project approved by this body in 2016. And the history of that is important, and it really frames why our application is before you today, and perhaps more importantly, why that building is not there today as well. Dan Rosenfeld is also very experienced throughout the Drexel Town Square area. He's the listing broker for the property owners and from whom Panera is going to buy the site. But Dan also has good perspective and may have some brief comments. On our project team specifically, Bob Polk is a civil engineer from Farnsworth Group. Bob and I met with Carrie, Lori, and Doug a number of months ago, and so Bob has been very hard at work with a number of the plans. And then Scott Marsh from Panera is his title senior construction manager. This would be a project that Scott is responsible for building once approved, and so Scott may be able to answer some Panera questions. I'd like to have Blair come up real quick and talk a little bit about the site specifically, its history, and how that led into the Panera request.
Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. Blair Williams, 735 North Water Street, Suite 1228 in Milwaukee, president of Wired Properties. I first had a conversation about Drexel Town Square in 2012. I got a call from Jerry Franke, who was embarking on what has now become this massive redevelopment with the city of Oak Creek. And in fact, the very first site plan that I participated in reviewing was entirely different from this one. This was a hard development for the city of Oak Creek and for Wispark to work through, and it's remarkable what both the city and Wispark in that partnership were able to accomplish. And we've been an investor here from the beginning. In fact, I remember sitting when this very plan was being crafted for the very first time and having influence, particularly over the role of Main Street and how Main Street would be developed, and also what the pedestrian environment would be here. I had a mixed-use background, and I was able to bring some of that experience to bear on what we were doing here. And I've always started first with the pedestrian. When we endeavored on Forge and Flair, what we were striking for there, we've met in large part. We wanted to create ground floor retail with apartments above. We wanted to establish a built form that felt urban in character but comfortable in scale. We wanted to anchor it with local retail, and we did that with our food and beverage users, and we like to think that Cubanitas and Bel Air Cantina and Pizza Man and Chocolate Factory and all of those retailers that are currently in that location are contributing to what the experience of Drexel Town Square is supposed to be. We have 4 vacancies in our retail space right now on Main Street. 3 of those have never been leased. We have endeavored and continue to market this property, as we always have, with the very best professionals in the retail brokerage community at Mid-America, doing that leasing for us, just as they also acted, excuse me, as the brokers on behalf of the city in the disposition of the land. We've struggled, and we've struggled for a variety of reasons. The project is overwhelmingly successful, but we've struggled to fill that retail space. There are a variety of reasons. A number of them are about Drexel Town Square. Drexel Town Square is fundamentally 2 developments, in my mind. We have a development to the east that's anchored by Meijer. It's surrounded by suburban outlots. And then we have a development to the west that really is the heart of Drexel Town Square. On our side, we have Freighter. On the other side, we have Meijer. As a result of the partnership that the city and Drexel Town Square made with each of those 2 entities, we cannot lease our space, any of the spaces, including on the unbuilt land, to businesses that include physical therapy, or we had an opportunity to have a specialty butcher shop. We weren't allowed to have a specialty butcher shop. We had an opportunity to have a high-end wine store. We couldn't have a wine store. There's a longer list than that, and those are due to the restrictions imposed by the relationship between Drexel Town Square and Meijer and Drexel Town Square and Freighter. This is not to complain. We went in eyes open to this process. But what it means is that the universe of potential renters is limited. We don't have the opportunity to fully expand our retail tenant base in such a way as to fill small shop retail space. When we worked on the original design, and I was a part of the original design team creating that building in the lower right of the screen there, the top left of that site plan, that building at the time was something that we believed was reasonable within the market because we thought that the market for small shop retail space would become quite deep as we moved deeper into what was happening at Drexel Town Square. It holds that street edge, but ironically, if the aspiration is pedestrian engagement, the challenge with that retail space is those front doors aren't on Main Street. Those front doors are on the parking lot. And the reason is because we have challenging grades, and quite frankly, Main Street is a vehicular thoroughfare at this point with complicated traffic patterns where drivers are paying deep attention to what they're doing on the road, and they don't have to engage pedestrians often because that's not an active pedestrian crosswalk with any kind of volume. What the Panera plan does, and I'm not here to speak about the Panera plan, but what the Panera plan does in an idealized fashion, from my perspective, is get more bodies on Main Street. It makes Main Street inherently more comfortable for pedestrians because the adjacency, particularly as they approach what is our retail core on Main Street, they will feel pedestrians next to them in the form of patrons sitting outside, or they'll feel more human-scaled elements that make Main Street a more inviting environment than it is today, and I believe a more inviting environment than it would be as portrayed in that building. For 10,000 square feet in today's market in Oak Creek, I believe we would need to be looking at larger users like Dollar General and folks that we would never talk to about bringing in to become a partner here at Drexel Town Square. We own Forge and Flair. We expect to continue to own Forge and Flair into the long term. I hope my children make good decisions about it in 25 years. We are unwavering in our commitment to this community. We are unwavering in our level of investment. But I can tell you from my perspective that I believe that the building as shown on this plan is not attainable in our current market circumstances. I can't reasonably project as to when it will be attainable because the number of retailers required simply to fill Main Street plus this is overwhelming the market's ability to deliver the types of users that we can put in here and that we would all like us to put into these buildings. I believe Panera is a wonderful corporate community citizen here in Oak Creek right now. And I believe that in this location, with the truly unique building that they've designed for this location, with appropriate modification, can actually reach a higher level of idealized outcome for Drexel Town Square than this building, built at an uncertain date in the future, would accomplish at that time. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I'm hopeful that we can move forward with a very successful development that improves Main Street and makes Drexel Town Square that much closer to completion. Thank you.
Thank you, Blair. And I want to thank the Plan Commission as well for indulging us in talking about some of this, because in some respects, this is more than just the conditional use that's on the agenda tonight. We recognize that there are multiple steps of this process and for this project, and there are multiple meetings yet to come. But as the staff report indicated, it is an important consideration as part of the conditional use, really how the overall design can be implemented and what the history of Drexel Town Square is. And so we appreciate the opportunity for Blair to provide that perspective and also for the back and forth we had with staff. So at this point, as Blair kind of hands it back to us, yes, it's our project, it's our proposal. I'd like to talk a little bit about that. And I know the staff report only indicated, or we only saw the one site plan graphic. In your packet, there were a number of renderings that, again, are somewhat premature at this stage because we have not made our site plan or our architectural review application yet. That would be, as I mentioned, the subsequent steps. But nonetheless, we put a lot of effort into painting the picture literally for you of what this building will look like on that corner and what the site plan will be, and specifically, as Blair even touched upon, a number of the pedestrian engagement strategies that we have. So the history of Panera, as you just found, we had the 2016 plan that Blair and Sean brought forward. Site is there and it's available. Panera looked at the site and began looking at the site and engaged with the city over the summer. I have kind of a seasonality theme for this slide. I think there was a meeting with Mayor Bukevich, with staff. Panera came in, introduced their plans, and had a very prototypical site plan with a drive-through restaurant at this location. And for the better part of the autumn, and since that time, Panera has been working to refine that plan and to really bring in the tenets of the Drexel Town Square design guidelines and how it can coexist and reflect that plan. So we spent the fall doing that. As I mentioned earlier, Doug and Carrie and Lori were kind enough to sit down with Bob Polk and myself. I think we had emailed them, or maybe we just presented the updated site plan at that time. And they gave us very helpful feedback, particularly on parking, the connectivity, the shared parking elements, talked a lot about design, heights of buildings, and really worked through all that. And of course, we talked about the issues that are still being discussed, the length of our building along Main Street, how the drive-through might function and circulate. And we'll touch upon this a little bit going forward. You know, the drive-through, it's one way or the other. We're bringing the building forward on the hard corner, and that will have some pedestrian interaction points. But the flip side of that is we can bring the building all the way back, surround it with a field of parking, and protect the pedestrians in a couple of those walkways. Bob Polk might be able to discuss a little bit more in detail of really how we're accommodating and managing the pedestrian conflicts and interactions. Knowing from getting a cup of coffee at Starbucks before coming tonight, there's parking to the west and the drive-through exits, and the pedestrians have to travel right across that drive-through lane to get into Starbucks. So it is a common thing that we consumers, I think, are used to, but we're going to want to be smart about how we design it. So the final season here in the winter, we submitted in November our application. I declare November winter because we had that Halloween snowstorm, and now we are going through the approval process. So a couple of these slides are going to have a lot of words, and I'm not going to read all of them, particularly the ones where I've highlighted. But what I do here in the upper left corner is a quick screenshot grab of the Drexel Town Square plan. Again, as mentioned, if you want to look at it yourself, I'll pass it on down. It's a layout of 2 pages per page, so that's why page 1, we just kind of put that in the middle there. And I wanted to draw your attention, the right-hand side of each of these is just a copy and a paste of what the key perspectives are. The design guidelines have a couple of overarching important principles under the application of the master plan, Plan Commission review. The second bullet point highlighted for you. that the Plan Commission is to allow designers and developers reasonable flexibility in the creation of specific designs to meet current and future market and economic realities. You now kind of see why we had Blair talk about what the current and market economic realities are. And here's what our proposal is to reflect some of those changes, where the world is going, and what Panera can bring to it. A couple other bullet points. If anyone needs to stop and talk about something, let me know. But as I mentioned, I'm going to stick to the highlighted ones. First generation proposals, also on page 1, another very important subsection, staff report, and I believe Carrie emphasized a couple of those elements. First generation proposals, the city only has one shot to do it right the first time, so that's what the first generation proposals and the importance is all about. The highlighted section, given the circumstances of that importance, the review of first generation development should be granted far more flexibility in the approval process. We're going to demonstrate to you that we think we have a good amount of what the plan requires, but to the extent we need some flexibility, we hope you, from the earlier passage, can be reasonable as you look at it and you evaluate our proposal. I note the final element is the sentence references non-binding first-generation design concepts. I was also around in 2012, 2013, and I represented Meyer as far as how that store was built. And I know that there was a careful thought as far as how, on that page, figure 1 in the lower left, how those potential store layouts, locations could be. But it's also non-binding. No one could have predicted the future in 2013. No one did, and there are deviations all throughout, and that's okay. The city reacted to what proposals were before it, and it has now created what we all know and enjoy today, but it admittedly in the plan itself is a non-binding layout. So to say the C1 and C2 have to be 2 separate buildings on our corner of Main and Drexel, that's not reality. That's not what the plan required. It was the proposed layout. Other important elements, and this starts to get into what we focused on the Panera team to achieve in this, which was how can we activate the streets? How can we have sustainability and walkability? And so I pulled out one of the bullet points there. These slides were getting a little dense. So on that section on page 3, the plan encourages the placement of buildings to enclose and activate pedestrian-oriented streets. I note later on, and maybe it's in this build to zone, yes, the very first sentence, the most critical requirement for active pedestrian streets is a sense of enclosure provided by buildings with ground floor activities. But I think that somewhat overlooks the bullet point that was above it that talks about enclose and activate. And as Blair spoke to, there could be a corridor effect with just walling off Main Street with a building, the backside of that building, as the Plan Commission has already approved once. Or, and don't forget, the directive in the bullet point is to activate the pedestrian-oriented streets. And so we took that very seriously, and we've tried to find ways that we could do that. It's also important, from my perspective, to look at what the build to zone language actually says. And to do that, I have to read it, unfortunately, just verbatim. But after that first sentence, and when it talks about the sense of enclosure, it says conventional planning practice achieves this goal by creating build to zones. Again, conventional planning, that's how we all assume it will be done, bring the buildings up, and that's conventional, but there could be other ways to do it, particularly as we're going to talk about activating the pedestrian realm. And so I just point out, it says conventional planning, it doesn't say it must be this way, it's just that's what it makes a lot of sense, and build to zones, we're not going to quarrel with it. We're very proud of our 98-foot building in that build to zone. And we note that there are some challenging grades. That's in our survey, that's in the site plan, and Blair spoke to that a little bit as well. On page 4, it continues with the build to zone, and these bullet points I thought merited mention. And again, some of this is for the site plan review at the future stage, but it really sets the direction for all of us. The first one is, in the build to zone, it calls for architectural elements such as, and I'm going to point out, the pergolas on the third line there. We noted that, and we had a plan where we could incorporate some of that. In the lower left-hand corner is a view of our proposed building, the rendering, and again, it's in your packet, looking to the north. So you, of course, have Main Street on your far left, and the building is right there on the corner. But we also have a pergola, which is a structural element to give some shading and some screening and a sense of place on that rear patio, as well as, and it's a little hard to see on this, but it is more evident on our plans, we have a planter wall and some seating right along the sidewalk. And so there's landscaping on the top of the planter wall. It's a structural element, a solid element in the site plan, but then the seating on the front face, and then to activate that sidewalk cafe area. The second bullet point references that one of the simplest way to make a place active is by creating outdoor places for people to gather. We're very excited about this proposal. We're very excited about this opportunity. We know people will linger on this patio. We know that it'll maybe flip Main Street from, as Blair described it, more of a vehicular street to having some elements of pedestrian connectivity. Having the bikers come and go. Right there is where our bike rack is on that in the foreground right there. So we're trying to do what we can to create a sense of place in activating those outdoor elements. And right out of the plan, it calls for outdoor cafes, outdoor seating areas to be encouraged wherever economically feasible. We're not saying maybe, we're not being pushed into this by the staff. We have a very large patio. We'll talk about parking counts and how that may play into it, all these seats we have outside, but we really think 8 months of the year it's going to be an exciting and dynamic place. So those were all elements that went into our site layout as we proposed it. I'd like to talk a little bit about drive-throughs and in the conditional use, because my first read of the staff report was suggesting that drive-throughs weren't allowed, and that in fact is not true. On the right on page 3 is the quote, the copy and paste, that the buildings along the north side of blocks B and C, as shown in figure 1, may include drive-throughs. Now, I grant you there's no drive-through depicted on C1, but neither is it on letter F, that's the Chick-fil-A, and there wasn't a drive-through depicted there. So it's one of those things where the map, the picture, doesn't tell the whole story. On page 3 it expressly says in block C, drive-throughs are allowed, and then the staff report, and Carrie emphasized tonight, they must be consistent with the site plan for the first generation proposals, and they are consistent with the goals of active and walkable streets as described in the document. Again, they don't have to be identical to first generation proposals. First generation proposals on the earlier page are non-binding, but consistency. And so we point you to our building is on the hard corner. We bring that up to where the C1 positioning is, and that our drive-through will have the consistency of goals of achieving those goals of active and walkable streets. That's page 3. Also on page 7, drive-throughs really go into the deep dive, or the plan really goes into the deep dive. Again, referencing block C, that's where they're allowed. For the highlights, I'll just stick to that. Drive-throughs should be located at the rear or side of buildings and should not be placed between a public street or easement and the main building structure. Check, check, check. We have all of that. That's what part of our outreach with staff, and I think the mayor's first view of a site plan didn't show it that way. And we recognize this is what the plan said, and that's what's important in the city standards. And so we followed those mandates. At the bottom, clearly defined pedestrian crossing should be provided where walkways intersect with drive-through access lanes. We know that there are going to be those intersection points. We can't avoid it with where our building placement is. And we're at a very preliminary stage with our site plan. I think we can better delineate those pedestrian walkways. We might be able to adjust the building, the entrance orientations. But at the end of the day, we have an entrance on Main Street on Drexel and an entrance toward the patio. And so those are not entrances dumping right into a drive-through lane, which is what I think the code and the plan is suggesting not be the case. In all cases, drive-through facilities should be designed to operate without endangering the public safety. We expect the Panera customers, of course, that's our number one interest, that they be safe, and we expect they'll be able to traverse this parking lot and the various bike, pedestrian, and drive-through elements safely. Then the plan on page 7 goes through additional drive-through considerations. And again, I'm not going to read all these, but they are important for what Doug said, which is the world post-2017 under Act 67, which is how does the city administer conditional use permits? And it's not based on speculation, it's based on substantial evidence, and it really starts, and this is also why my narrative grew to about, I think, pages 3 to 7. There are about 4 pages where I try to identify the code requirements and we address them. But it starts with the applicant. I do differ with Doug a little bit. The applicant still has a burden of demonstrating substantial compliance and the substantial evidence that the code requirements are met. Then it flips to the municipality that if it's going to be denied or conditions are going to be placed reasonably, that those have substantial evidence and they are, at the end of the day, rooted in the code. So that's why we focused all those pages on site plan and layout and all of that. But importantly, since we're going to bootstrap in the Drexel Town Square plan, there's a section on additional drive-through considerations. So I would suggest to you that in the conditional use permit review process, these are requirements that have to be met, and these are your guidelines. And I'm not going to read all of them as mentioned, but each one of the bullet points, we believe the plans before you demonstrate that we've met those, both in the location where the drive-through windows and the lanes are, the orientation, that was an earlier standard emphasized, not to be between the public right-of-way, quantity and width, we meet all of those, and I know Drexel Town Square has a double drive-through with the double wide at Chick-fil-A, so we have a single wide. Continued on page 7, it references automobile stacking. We have at least 4, pedestrian circulation. Again, this is our preliminary layout. We read the staff report, perhaps when all of you did, when it came out on Friday, and we recognized that that was the main staff point of emphasis on the drive-through pedestrian safety. We hadn't really talked about that earlier, didn't have that opportunity, but we will now continue going forward. So pedestrian circulation, we'll take that seriously. Menu board, microphone placement, we gave you the cut sheets for our menu board, that's in there. And all, by the way, all of the requirements at the site plan and architectural review, the Plan Commission can modify and can, again, address the plans before you, and with the appropriate votes and the motions, can modify what the guidelines say. And that's been done for signage and a variety of other elements all throughout Drexel Town Square. But the menu board has the open donut circles that go on. Again, I'm not going to read them, but we have given you the information that shows that we are able to comply with all of these for the conditional use permit issuance. Weather protections, we have canopies, but they're not separate ones or not detached. Signage will comply, and we'll make sure the signage program has the appropriate submittals at that time. Lighting, that's all more on the photometric study stage at the site plan. Audible level microphone, Panera does not want to be known as the place with the noisy squawk box, and so it's state-of-the-art menu board and ordering features will all be able to comply with this, and the drive-up windows and lanes will be reviewed on a site-by-site basis. So we ask that you go through those considerations as you consider this and make your recommendation. Of course, the final step in all of this is the Common Council will make the final decision on conditional use permit, but this body's recommendation is always very important, and probably why I have to do the longest amount of talking to make sure we answer all those questions to this body. At this point, I probably shouldn't have saved it for slide 12, but it is our second last slide. I looked at the staff report and the concerns identified under design and compliance with the Drexel Town Square, and then parking and the shared parking issue on site, and the suggestion that maybe we are short on parking. So I'd like to have Bob Polk come up and speak to that if he can. Again, I should have done it earlier than now to just catch my breath. But Bob, being the civil engineer, took a hard look at this parking lot. We had angled parking, we had various different iterations. Bob can speak to the access points and also the parking count. I know Carrie, before I have Bob speak to this, she referenced that there's a requirement to do a parking study or some type of analysis. We weren't aware of that. That's the first time I heard that tonight. It also sounds to me like that might be a site plan and architectural review submittal requirement. That's what we would be doing next. So we'll be sure to comply and cover all those bases. But we're very confident parking at 56 on site with shared parking with all the other pedestrian connections that will be covered. But Bob, if you can come on up and introduce yourself, please. And in the upper right is the graphic of what the existing site is well for our neighbor.
Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Bob Polk. I'm a licensed professional engineer and a principal with the engineering firm Farnsworth Group, and I hang my hat in our St. Louis office. And I wanted to provide some additional context on two different topics. One is the parking, and the other is the crossing, the pedestrian and vehicular conflicts that may occur parking your car and trying to enter the building. So if we start with the concerns which are raised in the report and which are the concerns which are brought forth in the GDPRP about pedestrian and vehicular conflicts, I'd like you, if we can go back to the 2016 approved plan. It's not uncommon, if you think about it, Anytime you park in a parking field and try to enter a building, you're going to be you're going to be crossing a vehicular aisle. So if you look at the 2016 plan, if I park anywhere in that field, I have to cross that north-south vehicular aisle in front of the building, and that's an uncontrolled.
But you're not crossing with the drive-through. Just make
Well,
that point. Go ahead.
That's true. But I consider crossing that vehicular aisle to be maybe more dangerous than crossing the drive-through aisle. That's an uncontrolled aisle of vehicular traffic, much different than a drive-through lane, which is a controlled access of vehicles in a more orderly manner. So I don't see any difference between the two. I actually see that drive-through would probably be safer than crossing that aisle that's in front of the building in the 2016 plan. So enough with that. Regarding the parking, we didn't present to staff, and I'll share tonight that the expectations of Panera at this location are 70% of their transactions occur inside building, the restaurant, and 30% through the drive-through. So this is primarily a sit-down restaurant, not a fast food restaurant. So the staff went through several different scenarios for calculating parking. I would just share with you that I think we should be leaning towards a sit-down restaurant calculation rather than a fast food restaurant calculation. And if we do that, I think you'll see that our parking will meet requirements, the various different ways of looking at this, either through the suggestions in the GTBRP or the city's code. And the suggestions in the GDPRP are just that. They're stated as approximations. And in looking at these numbers in my experience for the last 40 years, the numbers presented in the GDPRP for sit-down restaurants of 8 to 12 spaces per thousand are probably right on. The 20 spaces per thousand for a fast food restaurant, in my opinion, are pretty high. I generally have seen numbers around 15. But again, we're not a fast food restaurant, we're a sit-down restaurant. So I think we should be looking at numbers like 8 to 12 spaces per thousand. And if you do that, then I think we're adequately parked. And for most of the Panera restaurants that I've been associated with, 50 parking spaces is adequate. And most Panera restaurants being constructed today have patios. So that includes patio seating. We're providing 56 spaces, and we feel that that's adequate for this location and operation. Thank you.
And so with that, we know that there are multiple steps, and we're just at the first stage. We understand that conditions and restrictions, if that would be part of your motion for the next steps, would be coming up. And of course, a public hearing in front of the Common Council. And then we would also be doing site plan and architectural review. But again, we've given you as our best foot forward how the building is really coming together, what our amenities are for activating the street, and to give you really at that next stage, because again, this is a site plan decision point, but an equivalency of, in recognition that we don't have a 60% building, we don't have 132 feet of building along Main Street, but we are giving you equivalency, if not exceeding, in as far as activating the pedestrian realm and activating that space, exceeding in a better way than the backside of a building might, with a structural pergola, with multiple seating areas, with the bike rack, and with all the other connectivity that we're offering. So that would be yet what to come, but it's a very important element of your deliberations tonight. And we wanted to, just as much as the staff report identified it, address it tonight and provide you all this information. I know Scott is here who could answer some Panera-specific questions. But Bob Polk or I would be happy to answer any others that may come up. We really appreciate your time tonight, and we look forward to taking the next steps.
Thank you, Brian. Chauncey, I believe you had the floor. Did you get your questions answered, or you got something else?
Part of it. Yes, I still have more questions. So I wanted to get a little more details on the entrances and exits. First, vehicles, and then people walking into the facility. So where can the cars or vehicles enter and exit?
So I toggled back to this one, although I'm sure Carrie could bring up the site plan if you prefer. But on this one, with our parking layout, I don't believe the private road to the south has a name. So it's just known as Private Drive, but it does exist. And so we would have on the left-hand side there, and you can see our landscaping on the west, we would have one access point at that location, which the driver then could turn left into what are marked 4 parking stalls right there on the west, the southwest corner of our site, or turn to the right, and I don't know if that's 11 or 12, but it's a row of parking right there along that private drive to the south. And that access point also, though, could then loop into the drive-through, which is kind of grayed out right there, but the drive-through then goes through the landscaped area in the middle. In the landscaped area, that finger that comes out and protrudes to the east, that's what then defines the field of parking to the north. And that's where the majority of the parking stalls are when we have 56 on site. The majority are in that north location. And back to your question, they can also be accessed by the new curb cut on the east. And that's the one that staff pointed out was 44 feet wide. And that's at the midsection of where our property abuts the neighbor to the east. So that feeds, in the parking spaces that you see there are existing and are in that project to the east where the PetSmart is and the Mattress Firm. It'd be a shared parking context, and the property line is actually shown on our plan. But we understand the cross-access easements obligations that we would provide one, or we're probably buying the property already with the burden of that easement, but also the benefit of the easement to do shared parking to the east. I think that aerial photo is important. It shows really how sparse that parking lot is to the east. So even though we only have easement rights to that, it certainly appears that there's capacity with the users over there, PetSmart and a Mattress Firm. So we have that main entrance point that would be new, 44 feet wide. The reason for that, and I appreciate Carrie referencing that there can be exceptions to the 24-foot rule for emergency vehicles or service vehicles, and that's why we have it wider for service vehicles. It's the deliveries that'll come in, I believe, on a daily basis, Scott? Daily basis vehicle deliveries, just to make sure the restaurant has the fresh products and food, as well as then our neighbor to the east with whatever they're doing, mattresses and what have you, they could use that as well as their existing access. So that's the vehicle connections. Then for pedestrians.
Wait, before we get to the pedestrians, so with the vehicles, can you enter or exit at both?
Bob? Yes, I was going to say yes, but the answer is yes. The one to the west is sufficiently wide for two-way traffic coming in and out. And of course, the 44-foot wide one is wide enough. And I know the site plan that Carrie showed had arrows showing. I didn't really see where the potential conflict was, but I was just looking at that relatively quickly. From my standpoint, cars within that lower level parking lot traveling east can still turn right and exit if they wish to. But frankly, if we need to do signage prohibiting something, if it's viewed as a maneuver that shouldn't be done, we can probably address that fairly easily. But so those eastbound cars could turn right to exit, and an entering vehicle, provided they're following the rules of the road and staying on the right-hand side, here in America we drive on the right, they would stay on the right to the east and then hit the drive-through lane if that's what they're doing, or they proceed straight to the 30-some-odd parking spots in the north section of our property. Exiting vehicles, same way. The parking tray on the north and people coming out of the drive-through would just proceed most likely through that wider driveway, although they could snake over to the western driveway and exit that way because they're both driveways are two-way.
And the reason I ask if they're both two-way, because I'm just concerned that those entering, what did you say, to the west, that then go east, and then they go back west to go to the drive-through. It just seems that it could be maybe some issues, especially if some cars are entering on that east entrance and then going west. It just seems like the spaces, potentially, it just could be a concern.
And I appreciate that. I think we could perhaps designate the east driveway with those wayfinding signs, drive through, and so that might catch some people. And obviously, if it were to become a problem, and certainly at the site plan stage, if we continue to refine the plan, maybe we have signage that prohibits the eastbound traffic at that point too. So I think that's a very good question and concern, something that we'll continue to look at. But I also think the signage that we could do, wayfinding and the like, might address that. And then, of course, what people in their experience, they see the field of parking, if that's what they're going for, they see the door, or they're in a drive-through mindset, they might gravitate more naturally. But we recognize people come to our site for the first time, they may not be familiar with that, so signage might help.
And if I may, just to add on to that, I think I appreciate the commitment to reevaluate the circulation in that, because in one of your exhibits, you actually do show with that roughly 44 foot wide driveway, you show a inbound and outbound basically butting up against each other at the and I wish I don't know if you got the exhibit there, but along, forgive me, I'm going to traffic that's coming out of the driveway here, and given the width of this driveway, you show inbound traffic essentially butting up against the outbound traffic. Now, certainly that's a design element that can be and will be refined should this proposal move forward, but it just kind of points out the challenges inherent in designing a site around a drive-through lane in the configuration that they're choosing there. I think we want to get a lot more comfortable with how that impacts not only the traffic, the parking count, because remember, this is a shared parking field, not only for C1, C2, and the building that's housing PetSmart and Mattress Firm, although I hesitate to use specific names because tendencies can change, and they do change. But we would just want to be comfortable, and I would hope that all of the tenants would want to be comfortable, and the owners would want to be comfortable with the aspect that this is shared throughout the development and not only between those individual tenants.
Still on the vehicles, so the driveway or drive-through, so you can have as many as 9 cars waiting here, is that correct?
Many.
I was nodding because I was counting. I think we show 9 on that proposal, and I believe the minimum, the guidelines require at least 4 to be in the queue, to be stacked.
Now, I don't know who to ask this, so I'll just ask. Can you hear me? Oh, there we go. Is there a requirement to have, what do we call it?
Yes.
Pass-through lane? Or
No, there's not a requirement for the, like an emergency exit lane.
Yes.
No, there's not a requirement for that. The
Okay.
requirement is for queuing of 4 vehicles that don't impede traffic, don't block any rights of way, which it doesn't here. But in the DTS MUPDD, it also says cannot block entrances to the building.
Okay, so then that brings me to the pedestrian entrances. Can you go over where they're located also? Because then I had some additional questions.
Sure, and I'm going to try and blow this up a little bit. If it's okay, I'm going to sit here because then I can move the cursor. So we have a main entrance on the hard corner of Drexel and Main Street, right where I'm moving the cursor at that point. And we have another entrance right here off of the patio on the south side of the building as a primary entrance as well. And we have a staff entrance egress point over here, but that's not for the public. So for those parking, and we've shown the crosswalks here, but again, this is the first, the preliminary plan. We're looking to refine and respond to staff comments. We have a crosswalk designated here that then connects to a sidewalk along Drexel. as well as a sidewalk that we have on our upper level because we're higher elevation than down below on the sidewalk there. But so we have through the handicap area, the striped access points to a sidewalk that can connect to the front of the store. And of course, there'll be stairways here and access to that. Right here is another stairway that'll bring you up off of Main Street to this patio level. And then the other main entrance door is here on the south. Of course, that's designed to connect to the patio, the street side sidewalk cafe. This is the planter that I was talking about. This is the landscaped area. And we have our pergola as currently proposed right here. This field of parking can walk right through here. This is the pedestrian connectivity to the door. This field of parking also has, right here is the sidewalk that with the currently depicted crosswalk, if you will, showing it intersects with the queue line. As Bob Polk talked about, the queue line, that's not traveling traffic. That's stationary 90% of the time, then everyone moves up carefully. So we're mindful that we're having pedestrians intersect at that point. I know Bob has already started to look at if this can be more perpendicular, and again, that's how we would present things at the next stage. But this feedback is very helpful. The reality is, though, and this is part of what I talked about, that we're trying to adhere to bringing the building to the street edge. We're trying to activate those spaces, and then by default, that creates some of these interaction points. If we put the building as a donut hole in the donut hole and just surrounded it with parking, that doesn't comply with Drexel Town Square guidelines. It's a lot of front field parking, and we couldn't meet where the drive-through would be facing a street, but that would then enhance the pedestrian, minimize those pedestrian interactions.
So the parking that's, what would you call this? To the east, northeast, that large amount of parking spaces. So anyone who parks there, the expectation is for a pedestrian to walk in between cars? Am I understanding this correctly? If there are cars in the drive-through?
Right. If there are cars in the drive-through and they go south, then this could be a sidewalk that they'd use and go right to that door. They also, if they don't like the car sitting there, they can go to the north and walk around to the door in that way.
That's exactly right. I mean, you hit it. If you don't like the car sitting, right? I mean, even in your drawing, you got a car stopped right over that walkway. Very first day you're open, that's going to happen. I guarantee it. There's going to be a car stopped right on that walkway, and you say it like it's reasonable to expect your customers now to walk all the way around. I do not. I would like to see something where you're, that's only 3 cars deep. There's going to be somebody on that walkway all the time. If this goes further where you're talking about redesigning, I think you have to think about that where there's a great chance that walkway is going to be blocked constantly. You'll have some considerate drivers that might, stop before it, and realizing it's a walkway, but you'll have some people just not paying attention. They're going to be hovered over that a lot. I could see that already. I just wanted to jump in.
Yeah, because my concern are just individuals going in between potentially moving cars. One, if that crosswalk is covered, you're still going to have pedestrians take this path and try and zigzag in between the cars, which may not be too safe. And that's for the south crossing. Then you have the north crossing. I think that is, Carrie, is this correct, more common to have maybe a crossing at the end of a driveway versus in between cars that may be in queue. Is that correct?
I'm not going to make any representations that it's more common or less common. It's more visible.
More visible. Okay.
I do see that closest parking stall, though, would either have to back up straight in order to make a right turn out, or they would have to back up into the driveway. So that's another consideration to think about whenever a redesign would be going forward with this. I think more people would be able to see that crossing, though. It's wider. It's more of an angle. It's connected to that pedestrian walkway that kind of connects the parking field. So it is possible that you're going to have more people gravitating toward that one and going around the building. But again, they're looking for an entrance. there's no entrance on this side at all. So either way, you're going to have to go around cars or you're going to have to go around the building to get in.
And that was my other question. Why is the entrance, why is there only the one entrance? I think I understand the one on Main Street, so those who are walking can walk right in. However, how come there's not another one that's close by where they?
Bob, did I overlook this entrance? You see? Oh, absolutely. Introduce
Evening.
yourself.
Scott Marsh, Senior Construction Manager with Panera Bread, 3630 Grier Road, Sunset Hills, Missouri. There is an entrance on the northeast corner there as well that's not far from that angular crosswalk. And I just also wanted to say that we have quite a few stores where we've had crosswalks through the drive-through. We've used signage that says to the people in the drive-through, please leave path or crosswalk open for pedestrians. We have not had any complaints or any issues with it in any of our existing cafes where we have that. So I do see that it looks like a problem the way it was drawn with the car right in the middle of it, and that's probably an oversight. But again, we still have some fine tuning to do on these plans, and we can address these comments. But as a brand, we don't feel it is an impediment to our customers to get to our building when we have to cross the drive-through.
I don't think our concern is impeding drivers. Well, my concern is the safety of the pedestrian that's walking in between.
We understand that as well. To my knowledge, there's never been anybody injured at a Panera drive-through being hit by a car. You know, our customers are going slow. They're queued for the car in front of them. It is very slow-moving traffic. And they're very attentive generally because even after they get their food, they are not wanting to spill it, or they're not going to be tearing out of there at 20 miles an hour. They're going to travel slowly to exit the drive-through.
And then my final question about entrances and the pedestrians. How would pedestrians or those getting out of their vehicles in the south, how would they get to that entrance that you pointed out that is on the south part of the building? What's their pathway from the parking structure? Do they have to go through the patio to get there?
Well, the patio is a concrete patio, and there's areas where there won't be seating, where it'll be clearly easily navigatable for a person to walk along the patio and get to the door.
So if you have parking on the east side, those, I don't know how many spaces there are, how would they get to this entrance?
Can you see my cursor?
Yep.
Okay, so
How would
11
they get over
spaces
here?
right there.
Well, just like any other parking lot, they would
So they walk to,
walk down the parking lot. Or, I mean, again, we're at the phase where if we need to add a sidewalk, whether it's along that private drive, and it looks like there might already be one there, but if we need access points to get to that sidewalk, something we could accommodate, or, if we need to fit another means of, sidewalk to get them there, we can evaluate that and look at that by all means.
I have more questions, but
Oh,
I'll
no,
let
keep
someone
going.
else go on.
I'd like to
All right.
jump in.
Fred. All right.
I
You're
look
next,
just
Bob.
at Culver's over here between 4:30 and 7, and you got cars almost on Howell Avenue waiting for the drive-through. You're going to have the same problem here. What is the queuing time from the time you place your order to the time you pick it up? You're going to have cars waiting. You get your order, it's going to take what, 5 minutes, 7 minutes? What do you do with that person that has a big order? Where do you put him? Do you leave him sit there and wait for his order? Does he move and park someplace else so you can bring the next person in? You've got time, and to me, that time from about 4:30 to 7 is a critical time, and I see a major problem with what you have for your cars going through. I've been to Panera's a number of times, and to get an order takes anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. Where do those cars go from the time they place that order to the time they pick it up? I see a major problem because I can see cars back up all the way to the entrance, and then people are trying to get in or out, and you got people trying to go through the drive-through. I see a major problem right now. And take a look at Culver's from 4:30 to 7, especially on a Friday. You can't get out of the parking lot and go north. You have a problem even getting into the line to place an order.
I can't speak for Culver's, but I can.
But I'm going to tell you,
Yep.
my experience, it's 5 to 10 minutes to get an order out of Panera's.
Hmm.
And what do you order? If you get soup, it's fine. But you get a sandwich, a salad, a few other things, that's not like a McDonald's where they just slap it out and have it.
So to address that, on a final site plan, we would show a minimum of 2, but most often we have 3 pull forward parking. Where if we have a long order, that we would direct the customer to go to that parking spot, and we'll bring the food out to them to keep the drive-through moving to prohibit that from
I don't see
happening.
anything on the layout that shows that.
That's correct, because this is not our final, we have to go through all.
I understand, but at least something like that has to be taken into consideration.
Yes, we do take into consideration, and on every site that we have a drive-through, we will have those signs. We have those signs.
Can you tell me, though, the time it takes from placing an order to the time you receive it?
I don't know what the average is. It's an operations question. Unfortunately, I don't know that exact number. However, I will tell you, we have a separate kitchen line that services just our drive-through. So food that's going to the lobby is made in a different production area than food to drive-through. So we can focus on getting the drive-through service as fast as possible without filling it with, lobby orders. So they are faster than what you would get if you were to go to the sit-down Panera that's down the street. It takes 10 minutes maybe sometimes, and to get your food. Our drive-throughs, they have their own line to make the food.
Just so you know, Scott, we do show on this plan, the 102, a drive-through pull-ahead 1 stall, but as you said, this is the first generation plan. We also have the ADA parking there, so that might be an opportunity where things can be adjusted, but that's where it is shown. I assume all plans were in your packet, but it's one we turned in. So that's the pull-ahead stall that you were just referencing on one of our plans.
Yeah, and we will have more than one.
I also see a little problem with entering the drive-through. That there's a potential problem. You have only 2 cars waiting to place an order. What happens when you get 5 or 6 cars and they start going out into the parking lot?
It's at a point that, we can move the order board closer to the window. I think as we finalize the plans, we will evaluate that. It takes more time to get your food through the window than it does to order. So to have a less stack at the menu board makes more sense to have less stack at the drive-through window. But we can evaluate that and, make changes as necessary.
I have a few things. Want to just start by saying I'm really disappointed that the original design of Drexel Town Square is not being met, that we're looking at this building going on this corner. I think when we all thought Drexel Town Square was going to have this entrance with this large words over the top, we expected something different. I know we can't vote on that necessarily, but I live in Forge and Flair. I live in Forge. I live in the penthouse for the last 3 years, but more importantly, I also run the farmers market, so no one knows these streets better than I do. For 20 weeks every season, I am on these streets, and to think that these streets are quiet is a misnomer. There are people on the street. There are people outside of Pizza Man, or Cubanitas, or Chocolate Factory all the time. There's always movement on those streets. Not, of course, on that corner. It kind of stops at that edge, which is one of my main concerns, is that private drive. We use that private drive to park because we have underground parking for Forge and Flair. And I don't believe it's going to be large enough to have a retailer on that corner use that as their entrance, their exit and entrance. I know that we were able to park on that street, and because we had to get rid of the parking on that street because of fire lanes. So I'm not sure when we put in a new business on this corner whether that private drive is going to be large enough to move in and out. But also, last week Friday, we're talking about the lines. Chick-fil-A. My husband noticed 2 lines of Chick-fil-A, 10 cars each. Culver's, he estimated probably 12 cars in a row. And don't get me started on Starbucks. I mean, that's like down the block. That seems like there's 1,000 cars in that line. So as we look at this, and the pedestrian crossing and all those kind of things to play into effect, that private drive and coming on, you're going to be backing up all the way onto Main Street. If we're talking about the volume, love Panera. They're often, but 10 minutes on a good day. You're probably talking 15, 20 minutes, to get a sandwich prepared, and so it's not Chick-fil-A. You're not going through that fast. So I think we really need to look at those things.
Well, I wouldn't address one point is the time if you're, using the existing Panera as an example. I mean, there's reasons why we are moving. One, that's a tenant building that we made it work for our operations, but with the new design, we were able to increase the efficiency of our kitchen. Again, have two kitchens, two lines, one for drive-through, one for the inside. So we have a lot of strategic improvements that are the reason we're moving. Drive-through is one of the big keys to that. And so this site affords us to incur that large cost for those efficiencies at this new building.
Say one thing. So the plan for Drexel Town Square contemplated a 10,000 square foot building here with 100% of its access off the private drive. So the access to this parcel has always been contemplated to be off that private drive, including 100% of the truck traffic to serve that building and for deliveries and trash removal and all of those things. So just to be clear.
Right, but we used to have parking on there, and they said it was too dangerous, so they removed the parking. We had.
You mean the parallel parking on the street?
On the street parking,
Yeah.
yes. Well, we removed it because it was too tight. So all of a sudden, with snow removal and things, I mean, it's a dangerous. I live in Forge, so it's the
Right.
other side.
Yep.
And it can be dangerous coming down, especially hitting those corners. So you're going to have all of Forge, all of Flair, parking on that street.
That's where their access
right
point
around
is.
that
Yeah.
corner.
Yeah.
So if you're all backed up, those people won't be able to get into their parking structure.
Yeah, and I'm not on the Panera side of this particular transaction, but my experience suggests that having 9 cars to queue in a drive-through is more than I've ever driven through in my long career of going through drive-throughs. So I mean, I personally feel like with an appropriate order board location at the front end of that line, 3 cars in or wherever the right magic moment is, there is with 9 cars a whole lot of queuing. So I'm not as concerned about that. I just wanted to make very clear that whatever this site gets developed into, if it's a 10,000 square foot building with a large restaurant or whatever, that actually we lose the ability for outdoor patio with the original design of the building. It was never contemplated to have food service in it. So there was not going to be any outdoor space as originally contemplated in the plan for this building. But if it were to be a larger building with a restaurant component, then still all of those deliveries, everything's happening off of the private drive. That is the only location
Right, the
for it.
1-2 time delivery, right?
That's
but
right.
not traffic.
No, all the traffic.
Right,
All of
but
the
if we had a-
parking, all of the, everything that goes on in that parcel goes through that private drive.
Right, but the original idea of that building would have been similar to the ones like where I live. Would have been, right?
Yes, except
Lower
you can't.
rental.
It would it would have just been 4 retail tenants. So it would have been, it would have been 4 retail tenants. The biggest difference is the grade challenge is very complicated. So the finished floor of the building that goes there is feet above the sidewalk on Main Street. And at the north end of it, I don't remember, the civil grades would have it, I think we're 4 full feet. 4 full feet over the sidewalk. So if you think about what that means when you walk past there, if there's no landscaping buffer or any of those things, you'll have a building right up there, but you will literally be looking at people's ankles. So if there are people in that building, the pedestrian experience of that building is going to be looking at somebody's feet on the ground, unless there's some kind of spandrel glass or some kind of bulkhead to establish so that you can't see through, at which point you're looking up into the ceiling of a retail space as opposed to. So it's a challenging environment. We continue to believe that bringing the pedestrian activity to the main street is the way to create the appropriate pedestrian buffer. There's a tremendous amount of people all the time on your block, across the street, up and down from Performance Running Outfitters to Pizza Man, up to Cupcakes, wrapping all the way around to Bel Air Cantina, out on the square, we've got to figure out how to push people a little bit farther to the north in order to really get Drexel Town Square to realize its vision. And to me, that means in creating more green space and more pedestrian-friendly space in order to make that a more welcoming next step. Because right now, it's nothing, obviously, but even if we built a 10,000 square foot building, you'd be walking around to a parking lot to go in. You wouldn't have a time to engage with that building until you went around into the vehicular zone again, which the parking lot represents.
I just make a quick counterpoint. I agree. You want to push the pedestrians over there, but it's a bit of a contradiction because if you were truly 100% worried about getting pedestrians up there, you certainly wouldn't have a drive-through. I mean, you're
Well,
just
the drive-through,
encouraging
it does-
people
but
to
the-
zip through, and maybe people who are there for something else, and instead of maybe to get a haircut or whatever they're there for, instead of taking that walk to find and go sit down something, let's just jump in a car and we'll zip through the drive-through on the way home.
Again, their projection is 30% of their business to be drive-through and 70%
I
of their business
understand.
to be sit-down.
Yeah.
And given the volumes that Panera does, I can tell you that that means they're adding a significant number of folks spending disposable income on food and beverage, which quite frankly is one of the ways that you're more likely to get somebody to linger. They're more likely to go get something else and walk down Main Street and potentially walk into a retailer store and engage with something. Yes, there's a drive-through, but that's the model. I mean, if you look at what any business that goes here, any business that goes here has to compete not only against its nearest competitors here in Oak Creek, but against a broader market in the way that retail is evolving and hospitality is evolving. Panera has designed a site-specific building here that says something about what they think about Oak Creek. This building doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. One of the reasons that it's not as far along as some might like it to be at this preliminary point is because it's not a prototype. They are working through issues, trying to identify ways to make this more Oak Creek. They don't make their stores more anything, but they're making this store more Oak Creek. If you took the Panera name off of this and we didn't think about it as a brand, and we just talked about it as what it accomplishes as a building holding the site, you know, we haven't demonstrated we can do anything with this site because we literally cannot find a tenant to take one of the retail spaces in that building. That said, if we did, it could very well have been just exactly like one of the other buildings around. It could have been a Ed Jones and a Bentley's Pet Stuff and any one of the retailers that we already have on Drexel or Howell. That doesn't make Drexel Town Square better. That doesn't hold the corner better. That doesn't do anything to substantially upscale the entry into Drexel Town Square and downtown Oak Creek. What it does is seen people sooner. The way you make somebody feel like they've arrived at a community is to see people sooner. A building holding the edge is less important than people holding the edge. This building will be transparent with people sitting and dining and having fun and laughing, and a courtyard that's activated and bikes parked on the street. And the second someone turns in here, they're going to see something that suggests that people are welcome. Yes, there's a drive-through. Yes, the vehicle is being honored here and exalted in a way that I'm not typically one to say, let's have more cars. But the reality is, I believe that if we look at what the underlying intent was of the master plan, why we did this, it was because we wanted more people. We wanted people on the street. We wanted to see people doing what they're doing, so it creates those moments of engagement. I would argue 10 times out of 10 that this, with its outdoor space and its storefront facing the street with people sitting in there eating, does way more than that than a building. It's not about just the building. It's not about the 10,000 square foot building we had designed. We put the wrong tenants in that building, and it lessens Drexel Town Square. It doesn't make it better. I believe this improves Drexel Town Square by perpetuating a use that exalts the pedestrian over the vehicle in the way that it engages with its neighborhood, and it says, yes, come spend your money. You don't live here, fine. Come spend your money and go away if that's what you need to do. Use your car to do that, but please come and sit and enjoy what Main Street offers.
Don, you still up? Yep, I'm good. Where are we at next? Don, anything? Greg?
Few comments. Not to, I guess, go over any more on the drive-through issue or the design itself. I just know that it was brought up that we were told that the first generation development plan doesn't prohibit drive-throughs, which I agree, it doesn't prohibit them. But the statement does say that a drive-through may be included if it's consistent with the first generation site plan. I was not here when that was developed, or the proposed site plan itself, but I would almost argue that it's not consistent with the first generation site plan, which had 2 buildings. This is only 1 building. I would also argue that it doesn't shield it from Drexel itself. Although it doesn't face Drexel, it's completely open to Drexel. I would also argue a restaurant itself there would not draw more pedestrian traffic. And I only say that because with a family, my kids love Panera. I'm sure they would want to go there. There's just no retail that would draw us in on Main Street itself. I'm not a runner. My kids aren't runners. That leaves more eateries down Main Street, a bar studio, which my wife uses, but she drives there, does her class and leaves, a dentist. So I, too, think that being such an important corner, a corner that's welcoming people into the development, should focus more, I guess, on a retail base. Although I do love the building. I love where you can eat outside. I just think it needs a lot of work.
Matt?
If I could just point out on intent, I was there. I don't author intent, however. Buildings F5 and B5 are shown as single buildings, no drive-through. Both of them, the plan was amended to allow drive-throughs in those locations. We had a building that was identified to be for a sit-down restaurant only. It became a mixed-tenant building. I mean, each of the buildings on this plan have adapted over time to become what the market can support. And one of the reasons we have 4 vacancies and 3 suites that have never been leased on Main Street is because we haven't gotten the body count where it needs to be in order to convince retailers that this is a place where people will come and shop. So I would argue that your very point actually supports my thesis, which is that unless we get more people here, we can't even support the retail we have, and we have yet another parcel to develop with no prospective tenants. So, this is not something that I come here lightly about. It's something that I believe very deeply as one of the most significant investors in Drexel Town Square, that Drexel Town Square needs to help figure out how to solve for. And we do not have another solution for either of those 2 parcels, nor do we have any prospect of developing them in 2020 based on what we understand of what the market is today.
I just wanted to frame the issue a little bit once again. I mean, by most respects, I think there's a general consensus that a restaurant with a outdoor seating area is a good thing, and certainly something which is supported, permitted in this district in Drexel Town Square. The challenge for staff, for this commission, for the council, is to determine whether a drive-through is consistent with that vision. And I think that the discussion this evening has been oriented around some of the challenges that drive-through presents for the parking field, for the circulation, for the pedestrian. So, and certainly everyone's entitled to their opinion, but I think that all things being equal, a restaurant, take the name off of it, with a outdoor seating area of that design caliber is something that would be encouraged by the Drexel Town Square plan.
Thank you, Doug. Chauncey, do you want to go back? You said you were gearing up for some more questions.
Hello? There we go. I do have a couple more. So for the site, where are the bike racks located? Are they just off of Main Street?
They're right in front of the patio. To the south side kind of corner. Do you see our screen? I don't think they do.
Not yet.
Did I knock myself off? Okay.
But they are right up against the sidewalk.
They're right along Main Street.
It is on Main Street. Okay.
I'll be his Vanna White. Little sawtooth graph right there.
Oh, okay.
It hasn't been designed. I mean, it's not decorative or anything yet, but it's right So here was the planter seat wall that I was talking about. That's the bike rack. This is that southwest entrance, and now it's up there too. So it's right below where patio/egress door words are.
So would someone who's riding a bike get to that point? How would they?
Well, they're either on the private road or Main Street. If they're following the law, they dismount, they walk their bike on the sidewalk, and they park it right here. If they pop a wheelie and jump over that and they ride it on the sidewalk, that's how they get there. And they may come from Drexel as well. Again, the Drexel side may have bicyclists coming in, but that's why we oriented it right on Main Street, to give both a structural element but also accessibility.
Okay. And then just not to address the challenges with the driveway and pedestrians. So with what you've created as it exists today, what are the plans to make sure that pedestrians are safe?
Well, we will certainly have a crosswalk, and then if we need to add more signage to tell vehicles in the drive-through lane to please stop for pedestrians, leave the crosswalk clear, whatever they need to say, we can have plenty of signage to indicate that.
I guess I would just add also, we have pedestrians from two different realms at least. So from the public rights of way, I don't think there's really any question, I'm going to put words in your mouth, but I don't hear people being concerned that on Main Street and on Drexel, the pedestrians traveling on these sidewalks and onto our site are in harm's way. We fully expect, with the number of tenants at Forge and Flair and linked trips and other people who may just be walking to the Panera nearby rather than move their car and find another parking spot, that will have good activation of this pedestrian realm. Then, as Scott talked about, is very common in this area and all of the retail that we're all used to, there are many pedestrian pathways through parking lots and to those front doors, and we're going to mark them with better crosswalks. We can have signage that asks cars to stop. I'm familiar with, we've had Culvers a lot tonight. I know 124th and Capitol, Wauwatosa, where I live, that you have to walk right through that queue line to get to their main door. So it's common, it may not be optimal and ideal, but it's not by definition unsafe. It's not unreasonable, and it's something that we are all accustomed to. And so with a better crosswalk with some signage, or going to the northerly option, and I do apologize when I answered the question earlier, I overlooked this door. But there is a door visible, there is an entrance from that parking field that those who may just want to walk on this sidewalk to get away from the parking will be able to do that.
May I add, if you look at any Burger King, any Chick-fil-A, any McDonald's, if you're parking on the backside of the building, what you could call, because they're a donut, there are buildings in the middle. So if you're parking on the other side, you're walking across the drive-through, and a lot of times you're walking across the drive-through after they've gotten their food and they're cutting out of there. Ours has got curves; people aren't going to be flying through it. It's going to be slow traffic going through there. We feel it's much safer than that layout.
And what is the alternate plan for this driveway if this part may not be agreed upon? What's the plan B, just in case? Is it no driveway? Is that the other option? What is the other option here?
Our plan would be to modify what's here to fit the needs of the commission and the planning board. In order to have all the elements met, this is the basis, this is the ground level layout here. We will fine tune it and improve it as necessary.
Thank you.
Brad, go
I
ahead.
have a question on a handicap parking too. I look at the distance you have to go for those people. Why couldn't you figure out something on the south end in that so-called patio area, maybe to have some handicap, which is a lot closer to the door than where you have the handicap on the north side?
We will give you credit for that as it's been going through the higher level iteration. And I'm putting the cursor now, I think those handicap stalls are going to be relocated for our next submittal to that southern area where it says RPU right now.
Seems a little far. People like to be right toward the entrance, and if you look at most of, and I know we have a professional coming up, but if you look at handicap, most of them are right to the front door. No matter how, you don't have to walk more than 10 or 20 feet.
We will orientate them as close as possible. And federal law requires that they are as close as physically possible. We will do so.
Yeah, Jossie, you're finished. Don, anything, last words, anybody, before I take the mic for a little bit? Go
We
ahead,
had
Don.
one question, delivery. Where do trucks come in and go out?
I haven't seen the truck plan, but my guess would be that they would come in those two south entrances. They would not go all the way around into that parking lot. They would come in one and go out the other. And your follow-up question is probably going to be, well, when do we get deliveries? In order to provide the fresh bread, we have fresh dough deliveries every night. The baker, depending on where the location of the cafe is in correlation to where the fresh dough facility is, they get deliveries anywhere from midnight to 2 in the morning. That's just the dough. And then they do get some other materials with that, depending on the order. It's a quick delivery. It's a small delivery. It's just a few racks of the dough that they bake every morning because the baker comes in at 1 or 2 in the morning every day to bake the dough fresh. And then we'll get our standard Cisco delivery or whoever their provider is. And we will schedule that based on the needs of this cafe. We try to pick the least busy time.
Right. More important than the needs, I know that there's restrictions on Drexel Town Square because I know Valentine's had to redo all of their deliveries because they were coming in the middle of the night and that was not allowed. So I remember Michelle talking about that. So I think there's no delivery before 5.
So
There's a noise ordinance that has to be complied with.
yeah, we have in our new kitchens, we have our own. They have a separate dough cooler. If it's like our old location, the dough cooler and the regular cooler are combined. And we have now separated them, which gives us more time to keep the dough on site because the dough, if it sits in a cooler that has fruits and vegetables, it can get contaminated with yeast. So if we have our own dough cooler, which we will in this design, the dough can stay longer. So if we have to accommodate a delivery schedule per the city, we will.
Right, because now all those people live there.
Right.
They're all going to be in that area.
Correct.
Is that it? All right. A lot of my notes were already talked about, so I won't try to be redundant. I'm going to start with the statistic of 70% of the business here is sit down, 30% is drive through. It's a pretty high volume of drive through. Kind of shoots a hole in the walkability at 30% of your customer base is going to walk into Town Square and help that out. So that's pretty speculative. Go either way. We're going to get more walkability out of the Barrett Lowe thing going up with 242 apartments to flood retail and help fill facilities like this and whatever may end up here, whether this or something else or whatever's on Main Street. Public safety has been hit pretty hard. I think we've established it. It stinks. I'm sorry. I've never seen a drive-through with pedestrian walks through it. I don't like the drive-through. I told you this in the meetings early. Not a fan of them. And you threw it out there that Chick-fil-A got it. In the Drexel Town Square PUD, it says they may be there. That's our discretion. I was not a fan of Chick-fil-A. I did not vote for Chick-fil-A's thing. If I could turn back the hands of time and I would have read the Drexel Town Square PDU better, I would have put up more of a stink about that because there was never an intent, particularly in this zone, to have drive-thrus, without a doubt. So the grade, I understand that. I think you got a spectacular looking building with the grade. Everybody's dealt with that along Drexel from Water Street going west. Everybody's dealt with grade. I think I understand that. Can totally see that. You're right. Flexibility is built into this plan. Buildings have been flexible throughout Drexel Town Square as we needed to. Doesn't have to mean we accept every flexible plan that comes forward. Doesn't mean we have to settle for what we're doing. Dawn brought up the point. This was originally a different type of building. It was a 10,000 square foot big box building. That's what we wanted to anchor the corner. Blair brought it up. It may not be feasible in today's markets. I still think the site can accommodate maybe 10,000 square foot. I'm not the guy. Maybe you can get 8,000 in separate buildings, similar to what the C1 site was across the street. For those of you that are familiar with it, that was the C1 site. That was with 2 smaller buildings with a pergola type thing, similar to what they did over by First Watch, and where it kind of spans the deal between the buildings. They did something creative like that. Love the business itself. This has nothing to do with the business. It was either Blair or Brian said, you get one shot to do this right at Drexel Town Square. We get one shot with this land. We have to do what's right on this land. So, again, we can't speculate what the markets are. They can tell you, well, you're never going to get whatever you're going to get. I think we've earned here at Drexel Town Square the right to kind of buy some time. Financially, Drexel Town Square is holding its own. We're not desperate to have to put stuff in. Not saying this can't be reworked to make something work in the future, but this current plan takes away any chance for another 4,000, 5,000 square foot building to go on that site. On, say, the hard corner. I don't know what the name of that street is on Main, across from Performance Running. So you kind of take that away and the whole deal. So that's kind of really about it. Blair kind of talked about some of the business restrictions. It's true. They're in place. We're working to alleviate some of those future issues. Just because they're here now doesn't mean they'll be there forever. Again, I can't make promises, but then again, nobody else can on the markets and what they're going to be and what's going to be there. So with that, with the drive-through and the current design of it, I'm not in favor of it. I guess the last thing, it was brought up that you really need this walkability to make Drexel Town Square a success. Somewhere along the line it said, and I'm a little offended because I think Drexel Town Square is quite a success the way it sits now. And I think we're doing pretty fine. And somebody got up there and said, oh, you got to make Drexel Town Square a success. I think we're pretty successful the way we are right now. I'm not saying this won't improve it, or something here won't improve it. I'm just saying we got to do what's right. I've had a lot of things come in. The prototype's first one in the country. No offense, guys. We got the first prototype of Aldi's in the country too, and nobody's doing backflips for me over that one. So it's a cool design. I like it, but I think it needs a lot of work going forward. So that's it. If you guys are ready, unless there's something else, I say we take a vote. Don, you got a question?
Yeah, to staff. So on the motion, so we're doing this isn't a affirmative motion, correct?
The recommendation that is being proposed in that motion is for a specific council action. So it is still an affirmative. Meaning that a vote cast for the motion is for the recommendation as stated.
All right. Oldani moves that the Plan Commission recommends that the Common Council does not approve a conditional use permit for a restaurant with drive-through facility on the property of 7902 South Main Street due to the following. Is not consistent with the first generation development proposal within the approved general development plan and regulating plan for the DTS MUPDD section 17.0334. Does not fully meet the goals of the approved general development plan and regulating plan for the DTSM UPDD section 17.0334, particularly for active and walkable streets due to the pedestrian safety and vehicle conflict concerns, and would require substantial redesign to meet the goals of the requirements of both the approved Drexel Town Square general development plan and regulating plan for the DTSM UPDD section 17.0334 and chapter 17.
Oracle second.
Roll call.
Sullivan, aye.
Lorick, aye.
Gavich, aye.
Donnie, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
Hey, guys. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. That will get us to adjournment. We got any announcements coming up? We got nothing right now. Nothing in the city. It's quiet time. I guess the only thing coming up will be Winterfest, but that's in February, so we're a ways away. So anyways, adjournment, please.
Furlow moves to adjourn at 9:12.
Seifert seconds.
Roll call.
Sullivan, aye.
Furlow, aye.
Lorick, aye.
Kavich, aye.
Hold on, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.